Sarah?
Zoom working?
I think so, yeah. One quick announcement you can make. CJ Graphics, one of our sponsors, is doing a drawing, and we're doing the drawing at the end of the afternoon break, but people need to sign up and put that little yellow card on.
The cards are,
No.
where are the cards?
Cards are at the CJ Graphics. So go back there, fill it out, and then we'll do the drawing at the end of the second.
All right, everyone, wander back to your seats. Okay, now that everyone is full, hopefully. First I have a quick announcement. CJ Graphics, one of our sponsors in the back, they're doing a drawing, so he's waving. Super nice guy, I chatted with him earlier. But they've got the yellow cards back there. They'll be doing the drawing at the end of our break. That's gonna be after the next couple sessions, so go back there when you get a chance and sign up for the drawing. And with that, I'm gonna ask Sarah Top to come up here. I don't know. I don't know what the drawing's for. It's a surprise. That's part of the fun of it, I guess. Sarah Top here with Trout Unlimited is gonna give us a fun little update on Trout Unlimited and stream restoration. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. If I step away from the microphone and you can no longer hear me, please let me know. I have a really hard time standing in one spot. No, that's okay. That might be worse. Okay, my name is Sarah Topp. I work for Trout Unlimited, and my work region is here in the Upper Peninsula, so much of my presentation is going to focus on that work. We do have staff throughout all of Michigan, including the lower and Wisconsin, that work in the Great Lakes region, in addition to nationwide. So thank you for coming to my presentation about me and my bird dogs. They're really the main topic. Just kidding, I'll talk about streams. I am from Gaylord, Michigan, so I'm originally from the Northern Lower. I spent a lot of time in the Pigeon River Country State Forest, and that's where I kind of kicked off my career in conservation with the DNR at the time. I got a bachelor's in biology here at Northern Michigan University. And I've had various conservation jobs since then. I worked for Michigan United Conservation Clubs. I worked for Huron Pines, Marinette County as their county conservationist in Wisconsin for a very short term. And I'm happy to be going on year 4 with Trout Unlimited in this role. This is just a glimpse of the projects that are recently completed by Trout Unlimited in the last couple of years, ongoing or have initial funding at this time. So while my entire region is the UP, if you're familiar with the national forest boundaries, you'll see that we're kind of stuck in national forest project zones only at the moment. And that's because they tend to be our biggest partner and our biggest funding supporter at the time. But we are slowly expanding out of that as we get other funding opportunities to bring projects to new partners, or other partners approach us with different opportunities. Speaking of partnerships, I threw a few up here that have been expanding throughout the last 3 years in my role, and I've been fortunate enough to get to develop some of these partnerships and expand on what TU has already grown in the UP in this short time. Our work and impact across the region would not be possible without these partnerships. Some have been longstanding, like I mentioned with the Forest Service. Some are new, and more are yet to be formed, maybe with some people in this room. Support from these partners range from project ideas, coming to us with a priority that they would like to see come to fruition, or hosting community engagement events to share success stories, or asking for support via funding. A significant part of my role is grant writing and reporting. None of the work that I do for Trout Unlimited or with partners would be possible without funds, supports, and grant writing, or grant support. I would say it supports about 99% of the work that I'm doing in the time that it takes to do that, which would be my salary. I have a secure position with Trout Unlimited, but I ensure that by continuing to apply for grants that support new projects, match current priorities, or support data collection to prioritize new project priorities. This could be relevant to you if you're in need of product support via Trot Unlimited. So like I said, I manage projects, but we have staff that do design work for partners. We can help bring in additional funds to a project that might have some seed money. Things like that. With the projects that I've been involved with over the past few years, the costs have ranged anywhere from a $50,000 project to upwards of $1 million for a single implementation. Those $1 million ones are bigger road crossings involving bridges and a little bit more technical, complex site work. I mentioned that we have existing partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service and with the DNR. Those are usually in the forms of a 5-year agreement or contract. And we can add in new projects to those within that period. Some of our current funding sources, if anyone's familiar with these, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, their Sustain Our Great Lakes program funds quite a few of the projects across the UP. They've been a really big supporter and thankfully have not rejected any of my applications so far. NOAA is a big funder for the Great Lakes region in general, but funding opportunities that support work in the Lake Superior Basin are few and far between, and they are one that has started funding our projects on Lake Superior shoreline. There's been an influx of GLRI monies that come to us through partners and bill and IRA funds, the Good Neighbor Authority. And of course, we do get some donations that support things that we wouldn't be able to write into grants. And another part of my role is community engagement. So I work with my staff team to host volunteer events. We actually have one coming up on Monday in the Ottawa National Forest, revegetating the lower dam site. So the lower dam was removed, reconnecting 64 miles of the East Branch Ontonagon River. And we'll be helping to restore the vegetation there by planting some riparian plugs and white pines. Volunteers are involved in habitat restoration work. So in this picture, you can see they're carrying some large wood. That's going to be installed, or in this case, that was installed for stream bank stabilization and habitat for fish. We also like to engage the community in data collection when possible, so that we can have volunteers assist us with macroinvertebrate surveys and deploying temperature loggers to collect ongoing information on our project sites. All right, now into the more technical stuff. So I'm going to go through a series of some of our recently completed and ongoing projects to use as examples for what is involved in stream restoration. To me, the main goal of our stream restoration is aquatic organism passage, and you may see that abbreviated to AOP, or you may hear me say AOP. Simply put, if aquatic organisms can't pass a structure, their habitat has just been significantly limited. So a way for you to visualize that would be, if your driveway is barricaded and you have no means to get around it or remove it, how much might that limit your means to life? How about 5 miles from your driveway? The same concept can be applied to rivers via these passage barriers. So any road stream crossing, trail stream crossing has the potential to become a barrier. Or of course, there are dams that are installed, may not be necessary anymore, or barriers that happen naturally like beaver dams. The main cause of a barrier is that many structures, these road stream crossings, culverts and bridges tend to be undersized, which is the quickest way to become the passage barrier. That creates habitat fragmentation, and the solution for all of those is to replace the structure with what's accepted widely as a bankful width, or 1.2 times the bankful width of that stream. You might be wondering, what is bankful width? Bankful width is the width of a river channel needed to accommodate water flows during a storm event. So it's not the river at the time that you see it. It's not what might be apparent as a water line when flows are a little bit higher. And it's really difficult to see, I would say nearly impossible without survey data. In this photo, it might be an exception. This is a rare site where you kind of have a good indicator of what bankful width is just by looking at the landscape. More often than that, that's not what you see on a river channel. These lines are probably difficult to see. but the bank full is the blue line going across there in the middle. Something else that is important with all of our structure projects is stream simulation. This is a method that was developed by the U.S. Forest Service and other partners. It's a method for designing and building road stream crossings intended to permit free and unrestricted movements of any aquatic species. What they're doing is using the natural stream channel as a reference for what the structure should, or what the stream channel should be reconstructed inside the new structure. So it doesn't make sense to have a structure that has just a sandy bottom if there's natural rock and boulders on both upstream and downstream of that structure, because that's just, it's changing the river dynamic throughout your structure. So using the upstream or downstream reach as a reference to mimic throughout the inside of the structure is really important. That's something we do with all of our projects. Here's an example of a project that's going on right now. This is Chipney Creek in the Hiawatha National Forest, just south of Trinary off of 41. There's currently 2 undersized culverts. They are each 6 feet wide by 31 feet long. So lengthwise, they're pretty appropriate for that road size, but the width is too small and they're being dammed up by beaver activity almost every season. The new structure that was proposed is a concrete span bridge, 19.9 feet wide by 30 feet long. It ended up being about a $265,000 project just for the implementation. So that's not really including the survey time, the staff time, the procurement of funds or anything like that. And this falls within the minor project category with Eagle. Here's a picture of the same site at high water flows where this is almost to a point where the road is being overtopped by water and there's ponding upstream. This is a glimpse of the new design that's proposed. If you look closely at the rectangle in the middle, there's 2, you can see where the 2 existing culvert outlines are, and the alignment for the new structure is slightly different. So the alignment wasn't quite right with the stream channel at that time. This is an example of the design for the same structure. And this is, you're looking as if you were looking underneath the bridge in this visual. This just want to give an indication of what stream simulation looks like from a design perspective. So you're building a stream channel and banks through the inside of that structure. And since it's in progress, I included some photos of the excavation that took place at that site. So those 2 structures have been completely removed. It was excavated down to bedrock. So the picture on the left, you can kind of see a level, smooth surface. That was bedrock. And we were very fortunate that it's pretty level for us to work with because concrete footers are being poured on site to brace the new bridge structure. Another project that was recently completed in the Hiawatha, just a few miles from the Chipney Creek site, is a west tributary to Mormon Creek. The structure in this photo is significantly undersized for this stream, which is causing scouring, a full passage barrier at all flows, meaning fish cannot pass from the downstream side to the upstream side of that structure. It's not aligned with the stream channel, and there's a head cut on the upstream side because of that. The tributary, it's a tributary to a high quality brook trout stream being Mormon Creek as well. So this is a higher priority project for Trout Unlimited given that. The implementation for this one cost about $160,000. It was used as a design mentorship opportunity with the Hiawatha National Forest. And this also fell in the Eagle minor project category. Here's an example on the design plans of what stream simulation looks like from above on this structure. So you're looking at the top of the road and the structure going across. Aggregate and rock material have sizing specifications to match what's in the stream. So we actually tell the contractor and put in the designs the size range of rock that we want to see placed in that structure. It's quite literally designed. The culvert alignment matches the stream channel in this design, whereas before it was a little bit skewed. More often than not, you see people put a structure in where it's perpendicular to the road. That's not always going to line up with your stream channel. So prioritizing lining up the stream channel is preferred. Even if that means a longer structure, because you have to skew it, and it's going to require a longer structure to go beyond the road banks and tow. In this case, the stream channel construction began and ended 25 feet beyond the structure. So 25 feet upstream of the structure, we started reconstructing the stream channel with stream simulation material, and also 25 feet below the structure. Here's a picture of that during construction a couple weeks ago. So this is the crew using a dingo, so small equipment fits in this 8-foot structure to carry the heavy rock and material in and pour it bucket by bucket with that piece of equipment, and then place it by hand on the edges inside the culvert. This was designed to meet our U.S. Forest Service partner goals and stay within permit specs as well. So the permit does not allow you to reconstruct a channel further than a certain amount of feet beyond a structure. So we had to design it to stay within that parameter as well. So there's quite a few different things at play when we're designing these projects. The structure is set 3 feet deep at least. We usually recommend 3 feet or more to allow room for building that stream channel back through the structure. Another project from last season, this one's in the Ottawa National Forest. This is Trout Creek at Calderwood Road. This project reconnected 7.5 miles of upstream habitat that was currently not accessible at all beyond this crossing. There was a 9-foot tall by 14-foot wide metal pipe replaced these 2 smaller structures. You can see they're each waterfalls, so not passable by any aquatic organisms. Maybe a strong swimming fish like a salmon could get through there, but nothing else really. That created a plunge pool that was about 11 feet wide by 11 feet deep, just from the force of that water coming out of the pipe. That was a $250,000 project. And again, the minor project category with Eagle. I thought this was a really cool visual of the design versus the project actually happening. You can see they're placing the new structure in the spot that they have excavated and set down bedding material. So they're ready to set the structure on a foundation. And then they backfill and bury it in and cover, replace the road fill on top of that. But you can see the alignment of the stream matches exactly what was designed in the plan set. And that's pretty cool to have been able to capture that with drone footage on this case. This is a structure that is Callio Creek at Skinny Road. This project is in partnership with the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community and the Barriga County Road Commission. This site in particular has been in the works for over 18 years and finally have been able to source funding with the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community to tackle this project. My colleague standing in the photo, Scott Allen, he is the design engineer staff for Trout Unlimited covering Wisconsin and the western half of the UP. He's like 6'4", and that road fill is taller than he is. You can't quite tell from this perspective, but that's a lot of road fill to have on top of a structure. You typically want to be designing something that just has the minimum required 6-inch compacted road fill, depending on what your structure design is going to be. So that's all going to be excavated. The structure ended up being significantly undersized. This is a 3-foot by 6-foot concrete box, and I believe it's like 68 feet long. And that's yet to be designed, but will likely end up being a large bridge project. So it's perched, also a velocity barrier for aquatic organisms. And this one is connected to 25 miles of the Silver River. So it's a high priority project to reopen all of that habitat. Something else to consider is road decommissioning. The structure in this photo is corroded and has become a passage barrier by water flowing underneath it rather than through it. The road will no longer be needed after this winter. There's a timber sale going on and then it can be decommissioned. They have no need to access that property any further via that road. Those projects are pretty exciting because it's not something that needs to be maintained anymore and it's actually way cheaper. So this is going to be a $25,000 to $40,000 project and falls within the general permit category with Eagle, which is a little bit less expensive to apply for and requires much less review because it's not quite as technical. This is what the design plan for that kind of project looks like. The green dot area is actually wetland, so we do have to keep wetland impacts in mind, even for this project. There's going to be some fill removed from the structure, and it does have to be placed somewhere that's not in the wetland area. So these plans show exactly where spoils can be placed, where they can be smoothed out, places they cannot be placed, and where to remove the current existing culverts from. So after all those examples, I had to remove all of my bird hunting spots so that I could put these screenshots in here from Onyx. So you're welcome for that. On the left is the Chippenny Creek site that I had mentioned in the Hiawatha. And you'll see that there's in the lower right-ish corner of that photo, there's some commercial forest program lands. If there's an undersized structure placed on those, it kind of makes the work that we did pointless. So our rivers should all be connected. Our work is only as good until the next barrier happens. Same concept with the photo on the right. That project site is entirely surrounded by CFP land. So if there's undersized structures happening on any of that stream or in that watershed, it diminishes the work that's been done elsewhere. All that to say, I'm really hoping that this can become a partnership opportunity because I don't have any projects with anyone managing CFP lands or logging lands at all. So hopefully this lit a spark and people can reach out to me for future project ideas. And if you are attending tomorrow's field tour, we will be meeting in the southeast corner of the parking lot on Lee Road and K Avenue. And you'll get to see some of these, some local project sites here in Marquette and hear a much more technical review of what those look like when you're on the ground from Chad Kotke, who's going to be leading that tour with us tomorrow. With that, any questions?
Are there any citizen science platforms that allow people to report grid or older conditions? I know that sometimes it's available at county level. My county has a gas management process and it's available statewide.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I actually did not include that in this presentation because I was trying to keep it. There's so many different things I could go on about for 30 minutes, but there is an inventory called the Great Lakes Stream Road Crossing Inventory. It is a database. It's managed by the DNR. A lot of people use it. We have crews that go out in the summer months and inventory structures and culverts. If your organization wants to be trained in that, there are people that can train in the inventory. And yeah, that database has all sorts of different information on existing structures and their condition, if they're water, if they're a passage barrier, things like that, photos.
Hello, I was just wondering if, what do you do with the upper and lower parts of the river? When you put a new grade in the culvert, do you have to dam them off? Or?
Also a great question that I failed to even address in my presentation. Yes, you typically have to do what's called dewatering and a diversion. That can happen a multitude of different ways, but let me see if I can go back to this photo. So on the left here, they actually used the structure that they removed as their diversion channel. So they diverted the water through the old structure and they're working in the space next to it where they're getting ready for the new bridge. But yes, you do have to either pump the water away from the work area or divert it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really easy question, or maybe not, but, like, when you plan these projects, is there any consideration to, if there's beavers that would block the?
Yes, so this same project on the screen is designed with beaver activity in the area in mind. So it being a larger bridge structure, it will no longer be, will be a lot less likely to be dammed up by beavers. We have a couple of projects in the works on Grand Island that we're gonna be designing what we call beaver-friendly projects because they will still allow beaver activity and shouldn't get plugged up.
You kind of listened to it, but what's like the status quo with like managing beavers? Are they like fish species that you want to remove them down? You are like you want to remove them from the stream, or is it kind of like nuance where it's like try to make habitat for them? Because I know it's like kind of like maybe subject to a lot of.
Yeah, I think I speak pretty well for Trout Unlimited as an organization and that we are not trying to remove beavers from the ecosystem by any means. Rather than just design our structures in a better way where they exist. Trapping has happened at some of these project sites by other agencies and it's not a long-term solution. So we are just designing around them.
Hi, so I'm not meaning to stump you, but are there any organisms that still won't pass through a rehabilitated stream process?
That still may not pass through. The way we design them, if they are successfully implemented, I would say no, they should be passable for every aquatic organism. Mostly because we are designing them in a way that the velocity is it's not faster through the structure because it's properly sized to bankful width. So it shouldn't be any different than the existing stream upstream and downstream.
I was wondering, is there a reason that those original culverts are sometimes split into the two smaller ones? One big one?
Yes, it's oftentimes less expensive to purchase two of those structures to place, and they can be properly done. But the ones that I showcased in this presentation are still too small, and they were spaced far apart, so they basically created a dam with two small holes in it. But I would say traditionally, it's just cheaper than going with a bridge.
I noticed that a lot of places culverts are not.
I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but from my experience in this position, we have one that was elliptical, and that was the 14-foot wide by, or 14-foot tall by 9-foot structure at Trout Creek. Most times we're going with either a concrete span bridge or there's just a circular pipe will do the job for that site. We do have some sites that are going to be placed with timber bridges. So we have a site on the eastern end of the UP called Creek number 8. That one will have a timber bridge. It really just depends on goals and needs for the partner. So Forest Service, County Road Commission, some don't want to see that type of structure. Some would rather see concrete because it lasts longer and takes less maintenance. So there's multiple perspectives in the selection of what gets chosen for the structure.
I was just curious about the pinch points that were in the sketch on the one.
You weren't supposed to notice those. No, I'm just kidding. You can ask. You're just curious about them in general. Okay, so that was an example of stream simulation. That stream further upstream had some natural log structures, and those pinch points in this case is going to help create a pool. So it's going to increase the velocity of the stream in that pinch point and create a pool after it. So we're trying to create this mimic the ripple pool run type stream that exists above that. You're welcome.
Thousand years on washing out. Those average life, it's 90% structure.
That can vary on several things. So some of our soils are quite corrosive, and that can erode or corrode a structure sooner rather than later. But typically we like to see these designed to last at least 70 years. I won't be around that long to know that these worked, but
Do you have one then?
Real quick, what are the precautions that you take to worry about collateral damage? Like, how long does it take for the site to return back to its natural, like, no sediment being taken downstream? Is there precautions that you take for drought and all that stuff to not be, impeding on rural?
absolutely. So a lot of that stuff is actually spelled out pretty clearly in the permit process of what contractors are required to do and what we're required to have them do. The water diversion that I mentioned is a big part of that. So we're diverting the stream away from the work area, stream still flowing naturally, things can still pass through that diversion channel or structure. They have to use erosion control procedures and silt fences, filter bags. So there's not heavily sedimented water heading downstream while they're disturbing the project site. When we open up a stream back through the new structure, we try to do that in a really slow, controlled manner. So it's not like, you know, a flood going through the new structure and blowing out everything that we just installed in there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for the great questions.
That was awesome. The sites for tomorrow's field trip for the stream crossing are very cool. So if you signed up for that, it should be great. And next we've got Claudia up. What? I don't know. I can try. I don't know how to get it back on Zoom, I guess. Which one is? Here. No, I'm not sure where we put it. Okay. I'm gonna let me.
Sorry, Claudia, I wonder if we put it on. Put it on the desktop, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Clickers.
Looks good. All right, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm gonna try to stay at the microphone. Wave at me if I start walking away, please. So for all of you who don't know me yet, I'm Claudia Bartlick. I am originally from Northern Germany, where I got my bachelor's and my master's degree in biology. And I came to the States in 2019 to join Michigan Tech, where I graduated last year with a PhD in forest science. And I'm going to talk about some of the findings from my dissertation research today. So my research was conducted in the frame of the Northern Hardwood Silviculture Experiment to Enhance Diversity, or short NHSEED. NHSEED was established in 2016 in Alberta, Michigan, under the oversight of Christopher Webster, Robert Froese, and Yvette Dickinson, and Julia Burton joined the project in 2021. And the study was established on 110 acres of maple-dominated northern hardwood forest. And the goal was to identify management interventions to increase tree species diversity. So why diversity? Diversity is a very important aspect of forest resistance and resilience. And it is declining over a lot of forests in Michigan. And among the many factors that are suspected to contribute to this decline in diversity, with NHC, we wanted to look at 3 of them in particular. And the first one is some of the past and present management. For example, selection systems like single tree selection are considered to contribute to this decline in diversity by favoring mostly shade-tolerant species, and especially in the Great Lakes, that is aggravated by winter harvest, which minimizes the ground disturbance during harvest. And this together might has reduced the seedbed diversity that we have in a lot of sites, and hence we have less opportunities for diverse tree regeneration. Another aspect we wanted to look into is deer browse in conjunction with the elevated deer numbers in the recent past. And the third aspect was a local lacks of diverse seed supply. And the Fort Forest, where my study site was located, has been managed with selection systems since the 1950s. And in that area, we have moderate deer numbers, medium to rich mesic soils. And it is a maple-dominated site, as I mentioned. So sugar maple makes up for most of the overstory with a red maple component. And
You can either keep going or pause. I'm gonna fix it for the zoomies.
oh, all right. Thank you.
On slide 5.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. You asked somebody if it's. Looks like it. All right, awesome. Okay,
So,
sorry.
oh, you're good.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, a lot of maples in the overstory. Also, maple dominates the seedling layer. So we do have good maple regeneration in that site, which makes it different from a lot of other sites. But sugar maple and red maple together account for over 90% of the seedlings in the seedling layer. So altogether, it was a really good site to look into tree diversity specifically. Nope. Oh no, now I cannot. Emily, she gone. No, my slides are not. Oh, I have to use that now. Okay. So yeah, 2 questions that we had in particular for NHC for the tree regeneration was if species composition in the regenerating tree cohort would vary with differences in canopy openness and ground disturbance, and if potential gains in diversity would be constrained by deer browse and seed limitation. To answer these questions, NHC was set up in a 4-staged randomized block design. That means as our first stage, we had 4 different regeneration methods. You can see in the top panel on the left, single tree selection as our business as usual approach. And then we had 2 different shelter woods, a high residual shelter wood with about 60% canopy retention and a low residual shelter wood with about 30% canopy retention. And then we also implemented clear cuts with no canopy retention to create a gradient of canopy openness. And then nested in these regeneration methods, we have the second stage. Those are 3 different site preparations. we had as a reference a no treatment control, then scarification that we carried out with a salmon blade, and as an alternative approach, the implementation of artificial tip-up mounts. These mounts were implemented during the initial harvest by pulling trees out of the soil, including their root ball, and then tipping them over and removing the stems. The third stage are deer exclosures, and the fourth stage was seed addition. So seeds were manually added to half of our vegetation plots inside and outside the deer exclosures. In 2019, so 2 years after the treatments had been applied, we wanted to check if we actually created disturbance gradients with our treatments. So we took hemispheric pictures to assess canopy openness. And for the ground disturbance, we combined different variables like exposed mineral soil, coarse woody debris, leaf litter, and such. And as you can see in the top panel, going from the left to the right, we have single tree selection in the reference that had the least canopy openness, and then all the way up to scarified clear cuts. And in the lower panel, you can see that we also created a gradient for the ground disturbance. So how did the tree regeneration respond to that? We collected seedling and sapling data from the 2nd to 4th year after the treatments had been applied. And then we used non-metric multidimensional scaling ordinations, or short NMS ordinations, to visualize our data. And I know these NMS ordinations can look really busy and complicated, but bear with me, I will walk you through this. So, what this NMS ordination shows you is the similarities and differences in species composition in the different regeneration methods. And all the little points you can see represent our sample plots. And on the right side, you can see an example of how the NMS ordination works. So plots that are more similar in species composition will be closer together in the ordination than plots that are more different. So on the top there, those two plots, you can see like the different colored trees represent different species that we found. And those two plots are more similar in composition, so they are closer together. And the top and the bottom plots, for example, they have like no species in common, so they are further apart. And then you can see on the left again, can I do actually? Nope, I don't have a pointer, I'm sorry. But those hulls you can see on the left, they show you the total extent of the species composition or the species assemblage in each of the regeneration methods. And with this, ordinations help us to visualize two things: the difference in species composition, so how much overlay is there between the different regeneration methods, but also differences in species heterogeneity, so how much variation is there within one of the treatments. And what we found for the two shelter woods that you can see with the blue hull and the green hull in the ordination, they had even though there's some overlay, they had a significantly different species composition compared to the single tree selection and the clear cuts that you can see in yellow and in purple there. And the species heterogeneity in the shelter woods was also significantly increased. So overall shelter woods had a broader species assemblage than single tree selection and clear cuts. And we were able to confirm the same for scarification. So you can see it on this side in green. So across all the regeneration methods, scarification was also associated with a broader species assemblage. And that kind of implies that shelter woods in combination with scarification can likely benefit species diversity, probably because they create more seedbed diversity and hence more opportunities for like diverse trees to regenerate. All right, so going to the second question, looking at the constraints from deer browse and seed limitation. And we actually did find a significant effect here too. We found that plots that were in deer exclosures and had seeds added to them, you see them, whoops, you see them over there in green on the left side. They had the highest species richness, so the raw number of species that we found in a plot. Interestingly, plots that were in deer exclosures but had no seeds added to them had the lowest species richness. And that implies that while protection from deer browse can aid the survival of seedlings and saplings, it cannot benefit diversity if we don't have a diverse seed supply in a site. So what does that mean for management? Shelter wood regeneration and soil scarification can aid tree species diversity if limitations are addressed. So independent from deer browse, if in a site seed supply, diverse seed supply is a bottleneck for diversity, that needs to be addressed, for example, by seed addition or by plantation, and then measures like deer browse, depending on the deer density, could be considered as another tool to increase the diversity. All right. Another aspect we wanted to look into with NH seed was community dynamics in the ground layer. The ground layer is another really important aspect of diversity in northern hardwood forests. The herbaceous ground layer contains the majority of species diversity, and it is also in close interaction with the seedling layer. And given this importance, there has been an increasing interest how the ground layer community responds to disturbances. And one particular question that we had was if we would find distinct community assemblages that are associated with these disturbance levels that we created in NH seed. So to assess that, we also collected vegetation cover data from the 2nd to 4th year after the treatments had been applied. And then we used again NMS ordinations to look in our data. And we did actually find that diversity, species diversity and species richness in the ground layer increased with increasing disturbance. But when we look closer at what species benefited from the disturbance, we found that for both, for increased canopy openness, you can see that the red arrow on the left, and for increased ground disturbance here, the species that benefited were mostly generalistic species, so species that can grow in a variety of ecosystems, like a lot of braminoids and shrubs, and introduced species or non-native species also benefited from increased disturbance. On the other side, plants that we usually associate with a high quality ground layer did not benefit from the disturbance and were actually less associated with increased disturbance. And what that implements for management is that it can be challenging to balance increasing the diversity of the tree regeneration in the site and also maintaining a high quality ground layer at the same time. And there might be scenarios where that has to be carefully evaluated against each other. All right, and then lastly, we wanted to assess the utility of artificial tip-up mounds. While scarification can effectively disturb the soil, artificial tip-up mounds might be better suited to emulate the natural disturbance that occurs in northern hardwood forests due to wind throw. And these natural wind throw mounds create a very diverse microtopography with a lot of different seed beds. But studies have shown that this microtopography is less pronounced in a lot of managed stands. So the question we had was if artificial mounds could create those opportunities for diverse tree regeneration. And I'll spare you another NMS ordination here, but we did found significant differences in the species composition between the tip-up mounds and untreated reference plots. And the reference plots were significantly more associated with maple seedlings. So again, mostly sugar maple and a small red maple component. And mounds, particularly in the single tree selection, were significantly more associated with black cherry and pin cherry. And that were not necessarily the first species we expected to benefit from the artificial mounds. And they are usually more associated with higher light environments than we find in the single tree selection, but they apparently benefited from the soil disturbance that was implemented with the mounds. And a few things to take into consideration with our mounds was that they were smaller than a lot of naturally created mounds. That was not intentional. That was because the machinery that was used to pull the stems out of the ground was not suitable to pull out large diameter trees. So using an approach that can pull down larger trees, like maybe with chains, for example, could create larger mounds and maybe increase their utility. Also, when we looked at the mounds, we collected data again from the 2nd to 4th year after they were implemented, and that is still pretty young. Most studies on natural mounds are conducted on mounds that are 10 years or older. But we did actually see that the difference in species composition between the mounds and the reference plots became more pronounced over time. So maybe given more time, we would find more species like yellow birch, for example, that we actually expect to benefit from the mound creation. And lastly, about 70% of our mounds ended up resting on their root plates. That was also not intentional. They tipped back after the stems were harvested. You can see that down there on the left in that picture really well. Those mounds still showed some features of natural mounds, like the really steep sidewalls, but an approach that leaves at least a larger proportion of the stem attached, or maybe leaves the whole stem attached, would likely also help to increase the utility of these mounds. But nevertheless, artificial tip-up mounds could supplement established soil preparations like scarification to increase the availability of diverse seed beds and hence promote the regeneration of a diverse tree community. All right. So a few words about what's next. I actually just very recently joined Michigan State to work with Mike Walters on the Northern Hardwood Resilience Project. And this project by the Northern Research Station is in collaboration with Michigan State and the Quebec Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests. And the aim of this project is to identify alternative management approaches for resistant and resilient northern mesic forest landscapes in the future. Declining tree diversity in Michigan is only one aspect of the larger issue that northern hardwood forests are facing at the moment, and that is poor and unpredictable tree regeneration. In the past, a lot of established management systems have been suitable to promote natural regeneration in northern hardwood forests, but recent studies imply that the seedling and the sapling layers are becoming understocked and or dominated by few undesired species. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of factors that are considered to contribute to that. But eventually, this regeneration failure will make these forests really vulnerable for the loss of ecological and economic services. So two aims of this project are to identify areas that are of certain concern for regeneration failure, and then to find alternative management approaches to mitigate this issue. We're actually just getting started with this project, so this is a good time to reach out for opportunities of engagement in this project. And the first steps we're going to be working on is to assess the state of the resource and the state of the management by compiling large data set over the whole range of northern hardwood forests. And we expect to have first results on that published next year. And then in the long term, the goal is to develop management tools that help in the decision making for resistant and resilient forest landscapes in the future. All right. I want to say a really big thank you to my colleagues from Michigan Tech and my field technicians and many students that over the years have helped to collect a lot of data and process that data. And yeah, again, thank you to all of you for your interest in my work, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious, what methods do you use for adding to the seeds that where you distributing them or planting them or seeds?
No, that was just like a very simple manual addition. So we had a lot of plots, but they were small. So we had a seed mix and it was just, I don't know.
Interesting. Or how that can be distributed throughout the.
So what data are we gonna compile? Yeah. Yeah. No, so there's gonna be several data sources that gonna get into that. So FIA data for sure. Then in Canada, the equivalent, the NFI data, but also larger studies like Mike Walter's Northern Hardwood study, where we have sample plots and have especially seedling and sapling data that was collected on a larger scale that will also be part of our data compilation.
Hi, was there any criteria for selecting what trees to do the artificial tip out found?
So which trees we tipped over?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when the harvest was applied, it was basically trees that in the sites where we did not implement a tip-up mounds would have been harvested. So since we have so much sugar maple in that site, it were, I think, actually exclusively sugar maples that went into the tip-up mounds. But that was because we have so much sugar maple in sites where there are, maybe there's a little bit more diversity, or maybe we have species that are less desirable that could be considered to use these to create the mounds.
Is there any plan to do any larger scale size of those tip up projects, like emulate storm damage or anything of that nature? Even if it was a single tree?
No, unfortunately not.
Thank you. How about soil types? Is the soil type basically the same, so everything was, pretty uniform the way you did it?
Yeah, so it is mesic soils, and they are pretty similar. There are like some finer differences, but they are neglectable. So we made sure that like parts of the stand that had a different soil type were like excluded from the study.
One last question, what type would you recommend? That you explain?
What type, like what harvest or?
Yeah, would it be high intensity, low intensity?
That really depends on the site. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to what management would be best. And again, we were like particularly looking into increasing diversity in sites where we have good diversity, where there might be enough diverse seed sources around. Management might look very different. And then also, of course, depending on the goal you have, other for the side.
Thank you.
Great. All right, next we've got some more forestry talks, of course. We've got Sarah Middlefelt from NMU. Let's make sure. Yeah, can you take over after me, please? Thank you.
Okay, hopefully you're okay with not having your notes.
Yeah.
So that's this, sorry, Brunfold. Got to go to the desktops. I had hers in the procedure. Get back to the desktop.
Sorry, that person's my one weakness.
I have to go to the desktop to find the graph. You're getting close over there.
This one?
It's in that format. Sorry.
No, no worries. Okay. That's unchecked. Okay. Check.
While she's doing this, does anyone need to get up and do some yoga exercises? I saw that in the beginning of the day. There's a nice variety of poses that were an option. If people need to get around and move really quick, this should take just a second.
Great.
Okay.
You are good to go.
Great. All right, that's it. You're done with your yoga session. Time to get back to work. Thank you everyone for sticking in here. I know mid-afternoon is a rough time. The coffee is over here, so gas up a little bit. My name is Sarah Middlefelt. I teach in the Department of Earth, Environmental, and Geographical Sciences. Today I'll be talking about a project that was just approved last week for funding from the SISU Institute, which is a innovation institute at Northern Michigan University that funds a wide variety of innovation projects on all kinds of topics. So we were really excited that this thing is actually happening. So I can talk about it as a real thing as opposed to a hypothetical thing. The impetus for this project grew out of a couple things. One was an experience I had teaching in a small school in Vermont before I came to Northern Michigan University. I taught at a very small liberal arts college that was the second carbon neutral campus in the United States. And a big part of that was a cogeneration facility. And so this was probably the best course I've ever taught in my life. It was a field course in the summer where we were able, a colleague and I brought students out into recently harvested sites within 10 miles of campus. And we were able to see the consequences of our energy consumption embodied in this landscape. So this is a small clear cut, and the students were measuring changes in bird habitats, and we had an ornithologist come out with us. And it was a really cool project to look at how do we localize our energy systems through the use of local forest resources. So I came to Northern and they had just installed this boiler. I thought this would be a wood boiler. It'd be a really cool thing to sort of try to mimic here in the UP on a slightly different scale. So I was really fortunate. The last few years I've been working with the amazing Dr. Emily Silver, who's up here running the tech and does a whole bunch of things for this organization. And through work with her and projects related to wood energy throughout the state, hosting the Wood Energy Workshop last summer, there was a conversation amongst that group about like, wouldn't it be cool if Northern Michigan University could be kind of a pilot in looking at how do we develop community scale wood energy systems in a way that is economically, environmentally, and sort of culturally appropriate. So today I'll be talking about this project, if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. The big question, we're calling it the Northern Woodshed Project. And the big question is, how might we reduce the institution's dependency on fossil fuels while also promoting rural economic development using wood chips from sustainably managed forests? And so today I'm going to kind of give you some overview about our main project goals. And I'm going to ask you for help because, like I said, we just were approved for funding. So I am hoping that you might help me out by taking my survey so we can get some preliminary data on some perceptions from forestry professionals on this topic. I'm working with an amazing group of rock stars here on campus at Northern Michigan University, collaboration with the head of our facilities department and Giselle During, who will be leading the boiler tour tomorrow. I am listed on the program, but I am not a boiler operator. So Giselle will be leading the boiler tour. She was involved in helping to install the wood boiler in 2013. And so she'll be there to talk about some of the challenges in the past, and I'll talk about the history of the boiler itself in just a second. We have the amazing Dr. April Lindela from our Center for Native American Studies to help us think about indigenous ways of using land and resources. Diana Lafferty, who's done a lot of great work with large carnivores in the UP. She's a wildlife biologist. Dr. Adam Naisu does large-scale landscape ecology and remote sensing. Dr. Matt Van Grinsven, who does soils and hydrology, and myself, who was trained as one of the human dimensions people in a forestry department, which I just love that term because it's sort of a catch-all term from, quantitative social science to what I do is more about policy and environmental history. So I'm sort of, it's a fun team of people, and we're trying to work through thinking about how would this work at Northern Michigan University. I was part of a different group that was involved in creating a carbon neutrality plan for the university. And so we now, like many institutions, have carbon neutrality goals to align with both the Paris Climate Agreement and also state and national targets for 2050, becoming carbon neutral. And a lot of the things that have been happening on campus involve conservation and efficiency, changing out light bulbs to use LEDs, and shrinking building sizes and that kind of great stuff. But a big part of the carbon neutrality plan also talked about investment in renewables. So it states, we will develop a plan to potentially transition from natural gas to renewable fuels such as biomass or renewable natural gas at the Ripley plant. And so that's where this project kind of fits in. The Ripley plant, if you use kind of a quick introduction for those of you who are going on the tour tomorrow, it's actually 3 boilers, one of which is a wood-fired boiler that was installed in 2013. It ran for 1 heating season between 2015 and 2016. At the maximum, it uses about 42,000 annual tons of hardwood chips. And they stopped using this in 2016, mostly because the price of natural gas was so low. And there was also some technical issues with this wood boiler, which we will talk about tomorrow in greater depth. But now that the institution and a lot of universities are making these climate commitments and really trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we had energy consultants do an audit basically of all the energy produced on campus, and they found that shifting back to wood away from natural gas is what the primary heating source is, would reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by almost 27%. And this would be the primary way, the one kind of, and there's no silver bullet, right? When we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, there's no silver bullet, but it's the one kind of most substantial piece of the puzzle that we could do to really significantly reduce the institution's greenhouse gas emissions. So, and this, I don't want to go on too much of a rant, but when you hear all this national conversation around decarbonization and electrification, that's great. Like solar panels, wind, sure, that's great. But one thing that I get frustrated by is when you're looking at a place like Northern Michigan University and the UP, our primary source of greenhouse gas emissions is not electricity, but it's how we heat buildings, right? And so the Ripley plant is primarily a heating plant, but it also produces steam into a district heating system that produces domestic hot water and cooling as well. And so it's that piece of our puzzle and our like, greenhouse gas portfolio that is mostly like, that's the biggest problem, is how we heat our buildings, not necessarily the electricity that we purchase from the Marquette Board of Light and Power. For those of you who are not familiar with the greenhouse gas accounting, scope 1 emissions is basically all the emissions that your institution produces on site. Scope 2 is that those things that you purchase from others off-site. So we get our electricity from the Marquette Board of Light and Power that is currently has 3 natural gas turbines. So either way, both for heating on campus and from electricity produced from the Board of Light and Power, primarily natural gas. So we're really interested in thinking about how can we shift away from natural gas eventually and move towards these more renewable fossil fuel-free types of emissions or of energy resources. So some of the project goals are first to kind of get a sense of what is this woodshed and map both physical, but also economic and sort of ecological characteristics. These are just some preliminary maps that we've made. Just looking at, okay, within 30 miles or 50 kilometers of campus, what are the sort of stand characteristics? We know that we need a fairly high quality hardwood chip. So where are those areas that are going to be suitable to be harvesting from? We're also looking at land ownership. This is not a great map. I had one of my student researchers develop this, which was an awesome student project, but maybe not the highest quality. Again, preliminary project. We're hoping that we got a year and a half to work on this. But this map just basically shows ownership. You know, we know that in our area, we have a lot of commercial forest land, but then also the private non-industrial land as well. So looking at sort of the political feasibility of sourcing wood chips from our local region. Some of the authors of this study I met this morning. The DNR did this great mill survey in 2023 where they interviewed the mill owners to look at residuals, like how much of this low-grade residual material was available throughout the state. And they found that disposal of residuals is an ongoing concern. Many mills have a hard time finding options for this material. So, you know, maybe commercial or community scale heating systems such as the Ripley boiler might be an outlet for some of this material. Another project goal is we're hoping to engage collaborators. I've had some students, I teach some of our research classes, and so I've had students sort of start to do interviews. I think I saw a couple folks that we started to interview just to get a sense from people, experts in the field who are in the thick of it. What are the state of forest markets in our very local region? What might be some of the economic constraints around transportation, around labor, and all of this stuff that might create some barriers that we need to think about? And so I'm engaging you all. So this is the part where I'm asking you, pleading help. Would you, if you don't mind, I have a 5-question, a very quick survey. First, some questions, just kind of a preliminary assessment of attitudes about wood energy at this scale. But then if you're interested in collaborating, there's a line that you can provide your name and your contact information. We do hope to, now that we know we have funding, we hope to have at least 1 or 2 workshops in the coming year to try to put these pieces together. And so if you're interested in collaborating or being kept in the loop, receiving emails about this project, please put your name and your contact information in our survey. That will be really helpful. And I'll leave this up at the end of my talk too. So if you don't have time or your phone's not immediately accessible, you can do that later as well. Okay, and then the third project goal is really kind of looking at some of the engineering issues that came up when they ran the wood boiler in that 2015-2016 heating season. There were issues around storage and a couple other sort of technical things. So we've reached out to the Forest Service, has this wood energy technical assistance team, Lou McCreary. I don't know if anyone's worked with him. He's been fantastic to help us think about how can we maybe leverage some federal funds to help with some of the engineering constraints that were experienced last time they were running the wood boiler. One thing that I'm sure a lot of people are probably interested in is, I know when I talk to decision makers who kind of control budgets on campus, this is the slide that's most important to, historically has been the slide that's most important. This just shows you energy cost comparison. So like I mentioned, there's 3 different boilers. Boiler 5 is the one that has a capacity to burn either natural gas or wood chips. And you'll notice the unit energy cost, you know, wood chips are gonna be more expensive than natural gas at this particular moment. The efficiencies on wood chips are not as great, right, as a natural gas or other types of fossil fuels. The ASHP, that's like a hypothetical, if we were gonna move towards like an air sourced heat pump, right? There's a lot of talk right now about heat pumps as like a great way to, a great tool in the like toolbox of decarbonizing and lowering carbon. And heat pumps can be great, right? But the scale at which our campus needs heat, it's not quite there yet, right? The heat pumps at kind of a larger scale are not quite there yet. And so we have this district heating system. The idea is we have a wood boiler. Maybe we could resurrect this thing in a way that was, aligned with some of our carbon commitments on campus. But also those heat pumps run on electricity, which currently we get from the Board of Light and Power, which is natural gas, right? So the idea of wood is that it is fundamentally takes us away from those fossil fuels. But this is literally a hard sell to why we are no longer, or we hadn't been burning wood chips, but now we have this like carbon neutrality commitment. There may be an appetite for this on campus now. Okay, so I got 15 more minutes. I want to talk about bigger picture, biomass and campus sustainability. When you look at, there's the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, and they have these lists of the greenest schools that they use metrics on, everything from energy use on campus to curriculum and all kinds of stuff. And you look at some of the greenest schools, and they're, schools like Middlebury College, SUNY ESF, they heat with wood. And so we're not kind of like the first ones to come up with this idea. And actually one of the schools that I used to teach at in Vermont, this was Green Mountain College. The picture I showed you at the beginning, this was the boiler system that produced 80% of the heat on campus and 20% electricity. And again, I kind of want to just zip through some of this is a very analogous project to what I'm hoping that we can do here in Marquette and the UP. Poultney was the name of the town where that college was located. And so we got a grant from the Department of Energy to look at community scale sourcing of wood thermal systems. And part of it was like helping the college become carbon neutral. It was also promoting rural economic development. And then this was a piece that I thought was really cool and interesting was like, I don't know who's ever been to Vermont. Has anybody been to Vermont before? Okay, so Vermont is a beautiful place, right? And it has the highest per capita number of diversified organic farmers. You can't like chuck a bulb of garlic without hitting like a farmer or a young farmer who's trying to like live off the land, right? So it has a real appreciation of the working landscape. You hear a lot about the working landscape. And we were curious if we could channel the interest in local food, right? There's a lot of attention on local foods and focus this on local energy production and really looking at how do we decentralize our energy systems away from fossil fuels. So similarly, we did a bunch of, this was like, 8 years ago now before I came to Northern, we did a bunch of mapping exercises to, again, define the woodshed. Were we talking as a crow's flies or was it more like transportation routes? We had a bunch of workshops with folks who had expertise, so loggers, forest products, industry leaders, ecologists, policy folks, and we brought them together and we thought about like what to mean when we're talking about sustainable forestry in terms of bioenergy harvesting and retention standards, what does that look like? And we reviewed a bunch of different kind of different systems for biomass energy retention standards. And we kind of landed on using the use value appraisal program, which is very much analogous to the commercial forest program here in Michigan. It's an incentive program to try to keep landowners and keep their land in working production, right? So they pay a lower tax rate if they're part of this program. And part of being into this program, you have to have a forester who's overseeing the management of your land. So we had a way in to like know what was happening on those lands and a way to kind of have a little bit of oversight or understanding of, is this a sustainable land use practice? And again, we lived in the college where I was teaching at, Green Mountain College, one of the more rural parts. I mean, Vermont is a very rural state, but this is a very, very rural area. Lots of farms, lots of active forestry happening. And so the project really went very well because the community was very receptive to this. We worked closely with Ken Gagne, who owned, was like third generation logger and mill owner. We had students come out and we could see the pile of wood that was gonna go to heating their dorm rooms and heating our classrooms. And Ken helped us design some maps just to track where the wood was coming from, so that when we taught our field class, we could bring students out to these sites and again, really wrestle with the impacts of the harvesting going on these sites. Landowners were involved in this project, and we had the university president write handwritten letters to all the folks who were involved. He was, yeah, the college was very committed to sustainability and rural economic development. So we had some really interesting conversations with landowners who helped supply material to keep the campus warm. Lots of amazing teaching opportunities. And a great way to connect students with rural landowners. This was Frank Gorham, who was I think 5th generation dairy farmer in Vermont. And I love this quote. He said, "Dairy farming in Vermont is a hard way to lose money." And he said, you know, having even just a small stream of supplemental income for wood chips that he was producing for the college, you know, it wasn't gonna like make or break his whole yearly budget, but it certainly helped to kind of prop up some of the other land use activities that he was doing on his property. And again, students getting to see their energy consumption embodied in that landscape. It was really cool experience. So yeah, so we're kind of at the point now where I'm wondering, started working with students and thinking about, can we do something here in the UP? Is there kind of a economic and political appetite for locally produced wood energy production here in the UP? And so we're kind of getting things going with this Northern Woodshed project. Again, hopefully if you are willing to continue the conversation with us, I know there's a lot of expertise in this room that we would definitely benefit from. So if you could take the survey and give us, and if you want to be part of the project, give us your name and contact information. That would be fantastic, and we'll continue the conversation. So thank you. Anybody have any questions?
First of all, I was Ezra's roommate last year.
Oh, nice.
I know some of your maps.
Yeah, I should put, yeah, that's great.
But my question is like, what kind of like landers, designate the woodshed? Is it like, is it a balance between like the carbon, like output of like transporting the resources to northern, or like accessibility,
Like the physical, we're just like the concept of a woodshed is kind of a fun little metaphor, but it's basically wood energy only makes sense on a very kind of local level, because once you have longer transportation networks, it doesn't quite make as much sense. I guess you could look at the pellet industry and make an argument otherwise, but that's a different conversation. So we're really just looking at sort of, yeah, in the mapping exercises that we'll continue to do. Ezra's maps, we're looking at sort of 75-mile radius, but we're kind of looking at, and that's like kind of the general consensus, is it doesn't make much sense more than 75 miles away, because then cost of shipping and transportation doesn't really make it economically feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, what like kind of woods are you using? What forest are you going into? Where your harvest coming from? Just like what heat index, stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, great question. So right now we have only started conversations with folks like Holly Forest Products and some of our local like folks who are in the woods doing this stuff. We, unlike the Vermont project, because that was even smaller scale, that school I taught at was less than 1,000 students, and it was very small scale. So we like literally met with landowners. At this scale, we're slightly like 42,000 tons, annual tons. That is a kind of a bigger amount of material. So we're going to rely heavily on distributors to bring the material here, and probably not be able to necessarily have that one-on-one relationship with landowners. I don't know. We're kind of at the beginning stages of it, but my sense is just because it's a slightly larger scale, we're going to rely heavily on our partners within the forest products industries. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Just real quick, I think it's a wonderful idea, and in fact, I went to wood pellets because I was worried using fuel oil, and wood pellets would make more sense to do
Yeah.
that. But I was just saying that you know, you gotta make it cost competitive, otherwise, as a parent that wrote checks to this university, for son's education, the last thing I need is the $20 per bump on the education cost, and so thinking of it that way, if we can get cost competitive, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I also wondered downstream, what do you do with your ash? And I don't get a lot of ash from my pellets, I'm sure you're gonna have ash from this. So do you take that to a landfill or do you spread it on the land? or-
Well, yeah, and the one year that they had the heating, the boiler going, they did have farmers that would come and take that ash to use it on their neutralizing their soils. But yeah, the cost thing, that's the tricky part. But you know, as we see, you know, I don't want to talk about carbon taxes, but as like the price of natural gas and other fossil fuels does start to change, that does change the economic equation. But that's why if you look at like the schools that heat with wood, they're mostly in New England, which is based on fuel oil, right? And so the economics of switching from fuel oil to wood is much more, you know, like no brainer as opposed to natural gas, which is like a lower cost product to wood. So great point.
I was wondering if it was ever looked into as far as like northern environments, home wood chipper and purchasing brown wood to save on material costs and other labor.
Yeah, that came up, that's a great point. Yeah, that came up in the conversation with Lou McCreary, the Forest Service wood energy guy, as a potential way to get around some of our storage issues, right? Because if the storage of wood chips has a lot, I'm sure people in this room know, has some risks involved and it's kind of a pain in the butt. So that came up as a potential option of like what we could use that community wood innovation grant for that the Forest Service has that we're hoping to apply for either this year or next year. It has to fund like shovel ready projects. So we need to figure out, is that direction that we're gonna go? And so those are the kind of conversations we really are starting to have now to figure that out. But excellent question.
I was curious, the whole talking about like sources of where you get this, from, would you take a look at local law, like, sawmills that might have byproduct or all on standby if they need to offload?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had a great interview with the folks at Potlatch and they were like, let's go, you know, because they have a lot of residual. And if there's a way that we can line up the type of material we need, because one of the issues is that like moisture content, it needs to be a pretty well-dried chip and, you know, the technical challenge is if we can figure that out, we might be able to accept a wider array of types of residuals from like potlatch, for example. So we kind of have to figure out all these little details, but yeah, absolutely. That would be the primary. I think that would be a great source of heat for the campus because it'd be very reliable. It would be supporting our local forest industries. So yeah. Yeah.
So, on the first couple of slides, you listed your goal, switching from natural gas to wind biomass, and then going to renewable natural gas. So it's just wondering
Oh, yeah.
what makes natural gas renewable versus just natural gas.
Yeah, okay, so renewable natural gas, it's like a biofuel. So like, for example, Middlebury College, they're always doing like innovative stuff. Middlebury College is doing a renewable natural gas project. They still have their wood boiler going, but they're also doing renewable natural gas with like local dairy farms. So they're using like methane gas to turn that into a form of fuel gas so that they can use that in their heating system. So renewable natural gas is basically instead of fracking, like geological fossil-based sources, like you're using biological or organic material to create what is chemically the same thing as natural gas. I don't know that much about it, but I know that that's kind of a new thing. And I actually have a student right now who's doing some research for me because I'm like, what is this all about? Like, it seems like, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns about it at this point, but that's essentially what it is. It's instead of like fracking, it's a way to create natural gas out of organic material, different kind of biofuel.
Sarah, one quick question.
Yeah.
I think I heard you mention the word policy. You're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was some big policy changes down in Lansing last fall, the state's energy goal. And those climate bills were not favorable to wood biomass.
Right.
A couple of questions. One, did your wood boiler get grandfathered in for producing clean energy in that energy package? And two, what is Northern doing to advocate for more favorable policy?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So a lot of, and this is very typical of a lot of different states. A lot of the push for decarbonization, again, is focusing on electricity production. And so, yeah, the standards for using wood to produce electricity, like for example, they got rid of tire derived fuel, which is how a lot of, in Michigan, the biomass plants, like places that produce electrical power using wood. Also, most of them, I think, use tire derived fuel. And so that new clean energy legislation that passed basically said you have to use only green wood chips. And so that really changed the economics of being able to run those power plants. And so this project's a little bit different because it's not about, I mean, there is a turbine. If you go on the boiler tour tomorrow, you'll see that there is a small turbine that produces maybe a very small amount of electricity, but it's primarily a heating based system, which is a little bit different than what those, the major federal or state legislation is focused on electricity. So, in terms of like policy advocating in Northern Michigan University, I don't think it's done much in terms of like taking a stand on those types of legislative acts, but yeah, I think this project could be an interesting example of, again, community scale heating system as a viable part of a broader renewable energy portfolio that involves, you know, I went to one energy talk, I love it. It was like the key to climate change or whatever, there's no silver bullet. It's all going to be a bunch of buckshot, right? Like this might work in this community. Solar, if you're in the Southwest, solar is going to make a lot of sense, you know. Up here, we got a lot of trees. Maybe wood is a piece of it, you know. So putting together more like, I think, place-specific approaches to our renewable energy policy is something that I think a lot of the research that I'm trying to work on and I've seen is really try to move in that direction. So does that answer your question, Mike? Yeah. Oh, he doesn't need money.
One thing I think, the pulp market is really down, the paper market is basically gone, we all know.
Right.
I think this would have a lot of emphasis on the forest stands. Going in, picking out the stuff that doesn't have a future potential, you grind it up and send it, you know, to these plants. That would be a new market for us, but paper is dead. And I don't know what's gonna happen with that, but I think this would have potential.
Yeah, great, cool. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you guys, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are my people and like understand it, you know. Other types of groups sometimes don't quite understand the value, like cutting trees for green energy. Like, it's interesting because it's like, kind of like I talk about, it's like the redheaded stepchild of renewable energy. You know, people love solar panels and like wind, but wood is a little harder sell for people. And I think maybe not here in the UP, people who value like working landscapes, but it's a little more politically complicated, I think, for reasons that Mike, you just kind of pointed out. So yeah, we got a lot of work ahead of us, I think, in terms of education and all of that. Am I good? Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, guys, we're doing well on time. So now we are at our next break. So this is your chance to go put in for the raffle with the printing company back there. And we'll be back here at 3:30.
Someone has a burning topic they want to talk about.
Yeah, you can make it excellent. Make it a whole epic.
Hey, Ben, do we open it up for, people that want to say something or give a short presentation at 4:30, or we just go drink beer?
I'm inclined to just not belabor it, maybe it's like.
These Zoom people are about to get going again. Give us a minute here. We'll try to get it right this time. Well, we got it figured out. One-minute warning, everybody. Grab your chair. 1 minute. We're gonna get going in 1 minute.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Hope y'all got a little bit of sunshine in that break. We're on our last leg now, so we're just gonna kick it off. I'll pass it over to John and he can introduce himself. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is John Vucetich. I'm a professor at Michigan Technological University. And I'm not sure what you're thinking when you read the title of this slide, but what I'm thinking is, oh my God, how am I going to make this interesting? And so maybe let me give you just a little bit of teaser, which is about how it is that it even came to be here. So this title that you're reading now is very, very close to a title of a paper that was published in Bioscience earlier this year. And shortly after it was published, Newsweek became interested in running a piece about it. So a journalist from Newsweek called me and I was very flattered. She says, it's great. And she asked me a number of questions and she said, okay, the article will be out sometime next week. I said, okay, that'd be excellent. And then the morning that the article came out, the title of the article was just awful. I mean, the kind of thing that just made you hold your head in your hands and wonder about the state of journalism. And the article itself wasn't so bad, but the title was just terrible. And I spent a lot of time on email that morning explaining myself to my colleagues and my peers and said, you got to read the original paper to know what's really going on. Anyways, Mike Smalligan, who organized a lot of what we're doing here, I believe, emailed me and said, I read past the title and the article seemed kind of interesting. Would you be interested in giving a talk? And so I said, sure. And so anyways, so that's how it is that I came to be here. And so, so if Mike thought it might be interesting, maybe you'll think the same too. And with that, we'll get into it. So you can see the collaborators that are working here with this project. And I want to start with, get this technology figured out here. Nothing seems to be happening with the slides. Perfect, thank you very, which button? Oh, which button am I hitting? Just the. Okay, anyways, what I want to start off with is just bringing together a few threads to tell a narrative. And the first thread is to talk about the biodiversity crisis. And with the biodiversity crisis, there's an element of it that I think is extremely familiar to everyone in the room. There's this notion that humans have increased the rate of species extinction by about 3 orders of magnitude compared to the background rate. Of 40,000 species of vertebrates that are known to science, about 20% of them are at elevated risk of extinction. That's the familiar part, okay? There's a second facet to the whole thing, and the second facet is really kind of just becoming, to having greater awareness by folks who think about these things. And this second facet has to do with range contractions of species. I'm primarily a wildlife biologist, and so I'm going to focus on vertebrate species here. And so these are maps of species showing where they used to live and where they currently live. They lived in all of the colored areas, and where they currently live is that kind of tan color. And so there's black bears, grizzly bears, wolves, river otters, marten, fishers. I could show you maps like this literally all day long. And some of the best work on this topic actually is done by a person whose name is Geraldo Ceballos, and he has worked with Paul Ehrlich, the Paul Ehrlich of great fame. And they compiled as many range maps as they possibly could from around the world. And what they found is that among vertebrates, this is true kind of across vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, that the typical vertebrate has been extirpated from about 2/3 of its historic range. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. The average vertebrate lost from about 2/3 of their geographic range. That's stunning and not widely appreciated. This is the second facet of the biodiversity crisis. And if you think about it in terms of layers of maps, if you take one layer of map after the next, these maps that show current and historic range, and layer them all on top of each other, one after the next, you'd realize that certain areas have lost more species of their native fauna than other areas. And here's an example of one of these maps. These maps are available for different taxonomic groups and for different continents of the planet. This is one that's for mammals and for North America. And why is it important? It should be kind of straightforward, but just to be straight about it, it's important because species have ecosystem value that can't be manifest if they're not there. And so this part of the biodiversity crisis is also the motivation for what some people refer to as rewilding and what other people refer to as the restoration of biodiversity. So I'm going to weave together a few threads. So this is the first thread, which is just to appreciate there's this second facet of the biodiversity crisis. When you think of the biodiversity crisis and you think about the United States, you probably think first and foremost about the federal government. And you probably think first and foremost about the Endangered Species Act, for which the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for administering. And so the question becomes, is the Endangered Species Act well suited to handle both facets of the biodiversity crisis? It's an important question to appreciate because the Endangered Species Act was written about 50 years ago, really quite a bit before this second facet of the biodiversity crisis was quite appreciated. So we wouldn't take for granted that it's well suited. We'll take a look at it and see what happens. Where we're going to go next is particularly wonky from a policy perspective, but also really quite important. It has to do with the legal definition of an endangered species. The Endangered Species Act has a legal definition of an endangered species. It's really important because if a species fits that definition, it gets the protections of the ESA. And if it doesn't fit that definition, then it doesn't. So it's a super important definition. And here is that definition. And so I'm actually getting you to read legal text in the middle of the afternoon on a bright sunny day. And so let's just take an appreciation of that for a moment. Right from the Endangered Species Act, an endangered species is any species that's in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. If you're an English person, you'll appreciate that the grammar of that phrase is just awful. And it's a little hard to figure out what phrase is modifying what, but there is kind of an appreciation that those red words might be important. And if you were just looking for like a plainer language expression of what that sentence might mean, it might be something like this, that a recovered species is well distributed throughout its historic range, where I'm using well distributed as kind of a shorthand for that more technical phrase throughout all or significant portion of its range. Now, this is a plain language understanding of what that definition might be. What has come to be the case is that that phrasing hasn't received a great deal of attention by legal scholars or lawyers until about 20 to 25 years ago. And it started when the Fish and Wildlife Service realized that phrasing might be sufficiently complicated and maybe even sufficiently imprecise that it merits some policy, a policy that would interpret it. And so in 2001, the Fish and Wildlife Service offered a policy. It's a policy that's, I don't know, a few pages long or something like that. So what I've got here on the screen now is just a kind of a very, very brief summary of it, which is to say that those red words mean that a species is endangered if it faces threats in enough key portions of its range that the entire species is in danger of extinction. Now, if you read that green text and then compare it to the original, the actual legal definition, what seems to be happening here, let's see what kind of, oh, I'm sorry, I got to go back a little bit. What seems to be happening here is that the Fish and Wildlife Service seems to be saying that that red text actually doesn't carry any special meaning beyond the first four words, in danger of extinction. Instead, the red text is kind of just like an elaboration of those first four words. So that's the interpretation that's kind of being offered in that 2001 case. Fish and Wildlife Service made 3 delisting decisions on the basis of that policy. One for lynx, or they were downlisting decisions in some cases, one for lynx, one for the flat-tailed horned lizard, and one for a subspecies of goshawk. In all 3 cases, there were separate cases with separate judges in separate districts. The judges said, no, that decision is a wrong decision because the policy is not good. And the reason that they said the policy is not good, and here I have to kind of do some abbreviations a little bit. Right over here, SPR. SPR is just abbreviation for significant portion of range, okay? The judges said no because this interpretation reduces SPR to surplusage. Surplusage is a legal term, and it's basically a way of saying you've made words extra. And one basic idea in the law is that there are no extra words in the law. They all have to have some kind of a meaning. And the judges have said, you know, so this is, you're saying these words don't have any special meaning. They're subsumed by those first 4 words. So it's not good policy. You're going to have to try again. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service did try again. And in fact, they tried, oh, I'm sorry. I haven't given this talk in just a little bit. I always forget what slide comes next. So anyways, what you can kind of see is happening here, I think, or at least what I'm trying to set up here a little bit, is that we have these 2 facets of the biodiversity crisis. There's the range loss facet, and there's the global extinction facet. And the Fish and Wildlife Service seems, through its 2001 policy, seems to be pretty comfortable with the global extinction facet of the biodiversity crisis. Because if the legal definition of it, the endangered species, is very simply one that's in danger of extinction, you know, like everywhere, well, then that's that global extinction part. And then the ESA seems to be kind of well suited for, you know, at least confronting that. And that's all very fine. But if those red words, which I've now struck out, really are about geographic range and really are about whether a species is well distributed or not, well, now there could be a little bit of a tension because I'm at least starting to proffer to you an interpretation of the ESA that suggests that it is well suited for handling range loss. But of course, the way I'm setting this up, it would seem that the Fish and Wildlife Service isn't so inclined to see that. Well, that was back in 2001. And of course, the judges said that's a bad policy, you'll have to try again. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service did try again. And in fact, they tried 4 more times. In 4 different cases, they made 4 different policies. Each one of these policies had a different kind of name. Some of them are just colloquial names. Marymount is the name of a place not far from Washington, D.C., where the Marymount interpretation was made. And then there's a solicitor's opinion. There was a final policy in 2014. Then there was a rule to delist gray wolves in 2020. And in that ruling, which is about wolves in particular, they kind of started to work with a new interpretation of that policy. In each one of those new policies, that's now spans 2 decades, there were several decisions that were made, delisting or downlisting decisions that the Fish and Wildlife Service made on the basis of those policies. And in every one of those cases, they were litigated. We're talking about a dozen cases altogether. And in every one of those litigations, not in some of the cases, not in most of the cases, in every case, the judge said, no, those interpretations are not fine. And the reason that interpretations weren't fine is because they were basically just elaborations of the 2001 policy. It really does seem that for about 20 years, the Fish and Wildlife Service had been really, and still to this day possibly, very convinced that they had it right the first time back in 2001, that they simply hadn't explained themselves properly or thoroughly. And so they've kept trying to explain themselves now for about 20 years. The courts so far have not been satisfied. And so I don't know what will happen in the future with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's been a long time. They're quite clear, and they're not ashamed of it at all, that the Endangered Species Act is about global extinction. And that's what it's focused on. It is not about range contraction per se. And so that's another thread. Let's just kind of weave in yet again another thread. Let's just ask ourselves, what might the United States obligation be for stemming range contractions, especially maybe when they occur in the United States? And so some folks have conducted analyses that suggest that the United States contributes more to biodiversity loss than quite a few other countries. That work was published not too long, about 10 years ago in PLOS One. Some researchers have performed analysis to suggest that the United States contributes less than most countries to stemming those losses. Some of that work can be found in a journal called Global Ecology and Conservation. Compared to other countries, we're especially wealthy. And so I might just propose to you that we might have an obligation to do better than what we're doing so far. But of course, the challenge here is that we really only have, for problems like this, for problems that are so challenging as the biodiversity crisis and range contraction, we only have like 2 avenues for getting that job done, really. One would be the federal government. And if they're not going to quite do it, it does kind of make one wonder, can state governments do something? And should they? And what would be the basis for doing that? And what are some of the considerations around that? And so this leads to kind of beginning to be yet again another thread. And actually, let me just even kind of recap some things here a little bit. So range loss is a problem every bit as serious as climate change and global extinction. The United States has an obligation perhaps to do better. Federal government seems like it's trying to avoid this unmet obligation. State agencies would seem to be the only other institution with the necessary skills and knowledge, and probably no less important, the authority to be able to do stuff like this. And then we're starting to get to the parts that might be a little more challenging, a little bit hard, and kind of have to really think kind of carefully about. State agencies also have multiple missions. They have multiple constituencies. Like many other state organizations and state agencies, government agencies, they have way more to do than they have resources for. And so prioritization is extremely important. And so this line of thinking led myself and my colleagues to perform a survey of American residents, or American residents from a few states. I'll show you the details of that in just a minute. The survey was mostly focused on aspects of carnivore conservation, which is the discipline that I come from. But we added a couple of questions right in the beginning of the survey that were really motivated by this set of ideas that I'm thinking about now. And I got to see what my slides are saying next, make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Yeah, times are changing about what state agencies need to be prioritizing, and there might be some, well, it's always a good time to check in to see what constituencies think and what priorities are and how they might need to change. And so the survey question that I referred to you a moment ago kind of speaks to what it is that constituents of state wildlife agencies might think are most important. So now just a couple of details about the survey research. Altogether, we sampled about 3,500 residents. They were from the states that are here in blue. It had to do with the fact that the primary focus of the survey had to do with carnivore conservation in the Northeast. And we wanted a couple of states that were kind of just comparisons. So that's why Colorado and Minnesota are there. So it's not any data from Michigan, but it's from a number of states, and states spread out a little bit across the United States. What we see here could be representative of other places, and if it's not, it's still tantalizing enough to just wonder what it might be for the state of Michigan. And so the samples that we collected, the people that we surveyed when we were all done collecting it, the demography of these people, the age distribution and income and education levels were comparable to what you see in the 2020 census data. So that was, makes it useful for the kind of claims that I'm about to share in just a moment. I've already said this, and here's the survey question that we were intrigued to ask. So the participants were presented with a list of actions. I'll show you them in just a moment. And they're asked to indicate how they thought that state wildlife agencies should prioritize those actions. And the actions were to remove invasive or exotic species, to manage existing lands to improve habitat, to purchase or lease lands to create recreational access, to increase opportunities to hunt and trap species, and to restore species that are locally extinct or imperiled. So those are the choices that people were given. People could rank order them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I'm going to show you here, those are the same ideas that I just showed you along the bottom of the graph there, but now just in quite a bit more shorthand, so it fits on the graph. And what I'm going to show you in just a moment are the proportion of people that gave top ranking to each of those ideas. And so what we see here is, we can just make sure, interpret the numbers, so make sure we understand it, 43%. What that means is that of all the people that were asked, 43% of them gave top ranking to restoration as a thing that a wildlife agency should prioritize, at least compared to the list that's shown there. And then you can see all the other rankings. Now, one of the things that's important is that if you're thinking about a state wildlife agency, an especially important contingency for state wildlife agencies are hunters. And so you might be interested to know also, like, well, what do hunters think of this idea? So in the survey, we also asked folks, to what extent do you identify as a hunter? And then people could say not at all, a little bit, all the way up to very strongly identify as a hunter. And so when you look at those folks, and actually there are a couple levels here. What I'm showing you next are the people who strongly identify as hunting. What I'll show you in a minute is people who very strongly identify as hunting. Anyways, for people who strongly identify as hunting, there were about 200 of these folks. And that number is not surprising. For a general sample, it's a fairly small portion of people that strongly identify as hunters. And I'm going to focus way over here on the right-hand side, this last column right here. And so it's not surprising that more hunters think that hunting should be prioritized than a general sample. That's not surprising. But what is important and interesting is that if you look way over on the left, that blue bar above restoration, that's still the highest blue bar that there is. And so that means that people who strongly identify as hunting also think that the top priority would be restoration, more so than to promote hunting. And then for those who very strongly identify as hunting, again, we kind of see the trend going in the same way over here on the right-hand side. Again, not surprising, those who very strongly identify as hunters, they think even more so that hunting would be, or I should say, there's more of them that think that hunting should be like the top priority. But again, if you look at all of those orange bars, the tallest orange bar is above restoration. So even the people who very, very strongly identify as hunters are thinking, geez, restoration would seem to be a really important top priority. And this is definitely not just about hunting and not hunting, but this is true for different ways of thinking of the constituencies of a state wildlife agency. When you ask liberals, moderates, and conservatives, because we also in the survey asked, how do you identify politically? What we see here is that it's the greatest share of folks that are saying that the top ranking should go to restoration. And so it tapers off a little bit for conservatives, but it's still what the plurality was. 37% is not the majority, but more than any of those other 5 ideas that we were sharing, went to restoration. And it's not just about political ideology and hunting or not hunting, but it's also across ages. Different age groups are extremely important for wildlife agencies, state wildlife agencies, because it does feel like there's a bit of a generation gap between some of the oldest constituencies and some of the youngest constituencies about what it is that you're interested in. And again, what we see in this particular case is that the proportion of people that get top billing to restoration is about the same across all these age groups. And so if a state wildlife agency is looking for something that unifies hunters and non-hunters, liberals and conservatives, old folks and young folks, think how many things unify all of those age groups? Not a lot, it would seem, if you read the newspaper much. But it does seem that restoring wildlife, restoring extirpated species might be one of those things. And so I think I will leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I think there's a moment for questions, so I'll turn it over to the folks with the mics to manage that.
Thanks, great talk, John. So, I'm just curious, in the graph, it said restoration. You were specifically talking about mammal or vertebrate restoration. What were the people that responded really confronted with, or what were they asked to choose? Because restoration could mean something different.
Yeah, what would the verbiage that was given for the survey participants is what's right here. So restore species that are locally extinct or imperiled. And then the context of the survey was very much about wildlife species. So what was in the participants' mind was totally like wildlife stuff. Yeah. Yep.
So what policy recommendations do you have? That's quite a message.
Yeah.
And how do you communicate that to either federal or state agencies, and what recommendations might you give them?
I would not recommend using Newsweek as a way of committing these things. No, probably the most specific thing that I could offer right now is that a great deal of funding that state wildlife agencies get comes from the federal government. And part of getting that funding involves something called a SWAP, or a state wildlife agency plan, state wildlife action plan. These plans have to be renewed every 10 years, and the renewal for SWAPs is coming up in the next year. And one of the things that happens with the SWAP, and every state has to do one, Michigan and every other state. What happens on a SWAP is the state has to identify among other things, they have to identify the species that they think are going to be the most important to pay attention to in the next 10 years. And if a species is listed on that SWAP, it has a much, much greater chance of getting serious attention in the next 10 years as if it's not. The beautiful thing about a SWAP is that if a species is put on that list, it doesn't obligate the state to much, but it leaves the door open for it, especially some of those federal funds. And so one thing that is a management consideration, I don't know if I'd be so strong as to say it's a straight up recommendation, there's a number of other considerations, but taking the species that have been extirpated from a state, putting those up on the next set of SWAPs that come up, which are due next year. So that would be something very specific. Some states are doing exactly that. I'm not sure exactly where Michigan's at on it, just because I haven't paid close attention, but that would be something quite specific, yeah.
Okay, we need to know what the Newsweek headlines are.
You know, this is the honest truth. I've actually blocked it from my memory, but it was some sort of inflammatory thing about pro and anti-hunting that was just kind of really ridiculous. Yeah, it was along those lines. Yeah, there's no need to look it up. But I've given you so much titillation about it.
States started to move away from like a licensing and permit funding model for a lot of communities.
Right, I can maybe even address that a little bit more broadly. One of the things that's kind of a circumstance is that many state wildlife agencies get a really serious amount of support financially from hunters. And so that's one of the things that makes state wildlife agencies really interested in knowing what they think and kind of following that perspective. Some states have attempted to diversify the way in which they get funding. And I'm absolutely not speaking about Michigan here in particular, but just kind of speaking about states across the whole. It's been difficult because some elements within the hunting community are really quite knowledgeable, in fact, about how much influence they have. And they would like to keep that and not too terribly interested in sharing that. So there's been some political obstacles to diversifying that. Missouri has done some interesting things. California's been serious about stuff like that. State of Maine has done some things. So it's starting to happen, but it's the early days of that kind of diversification.
This is kind of like a first question, I guess, but was there a dollar figure attached to any of these options? If there was, do you think that would change how people vote? But just like a lay person looking
Yeah.
at this, looking at these options, I know, like, I guess in my experience, restoring an extinct species would probably be incredibly expensive as opposed to managing that habitat that already exists. And you can do more good with less money than this.
No, for sure. We did not attach price tags to this. And to speak to the cost of things, I mean, a couple of thoughts. I'm not gonna ever believe that we can't confront the biodiversity crisis because we don't have enough money. I'm just not gonna ever accept that. Second thing, far more practical. I do think, and this is just my view, and it's a view that's just emerging myself. I don't know what I'll think about it in 3 years from now or 5 years from now. I do think that doing better on the biodiversity crisis is gonna depend on innovative collaborations between government and private entities in a way we've never seen before. I only say that because the experiences I've had in the last 5 years or so have shown me that, and you'll have your own experiences just, again, just from reading the newspapers. As time goes on, the world is increasingly driven by philanthropy and private money. And sometimes doing good things for public good, and sometimes maybe not doing such good things for public good. But there's a lot of private money out there for rewilding. And if there was a way to join that money with an institution that has the authority to do that kind of stuff, for which, as far as I know, there's only 2 kinds of authority that have that: state and federal government. That seems to me part of the issue. That's part of the reason that I'm never going to accept there ain't enough money to solve the biodiversity crisis. So it's an important consideration for sure, but it's like something to solve, not something to say, oh, it's probably not important.
So thank you for being here. This is really interesting. I was curious if you and your colleagues have any intentions on kind of digging deeper, like especially with the restoration. Like, I'm from Kentucky and I work with their elk program. So I'm kind of curious about, like, when you're digging deeper and you're asking folks what their priorities are, you know, a lot of folks reintroducing elk, all cool, they're totally for it. Reintroducing cougars in Kentucky would not go over very well. So I was kind of curious if you guys are gonna dig deeper and kind of really suss out opinions on restoration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm involved with a couple of projects that are doing just exactly that, digging deeper. This kind of digging deeper that you're talking about now starts to require, you know, at the very least, very, very good dialogue with the state agency, just to make sure that the right, because what you're talking about gets into nuts and bolts really kind of quickly. You want to make sure that if it's survey work that you're talking about, people's attitudes, you want to make sure those questions are framed in just a proper way that's satisfying to a state agency, as well as other folks that are kind of interested in it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of species that need help. And so every one of those is going to be kind of its own case. So, yeah. Yeah, we'll let the.
So, I only have, like, as far as like policy or some things that we could put out, like state government and federal government, like, would creating more wildlife corridors, help reduce, you know, habitat aggregation and all that kind of stuff, that is to do with part of the species or maybe locally extinct, but trying to get back to where they're in, like, let's say the cougars in LA, like P22 and stuff like that. Would that help them?
Wildlife corridors are extremely valuable, and they come in a number of different kinds, but the kinds in particular that are intended to reduce roadkill is super important, especially for, as you mentioned, species like cougars. And so, yeah, it's one of quite a few tools that are important. So, yeah, definitely. So I think that's, yeah. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Alrighty, our next speaker
Almost Zoom meeting.
is, I don't know what I'm doing, so
I'll get the Zoom.
go for it. Our next speaker, ran some travel issues and is gonna be presenting via Zoom. So hopefully Rebecca is able to be here virtually.
Hey, Rebecca, I just promoted you to panelist. Are you able to share your screen now?
Okay, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Let me get the microphone a little closer to the speaker on the laptop. Sorry for the noise there. Are you able to share your screen?
It says I'm not able to share my screen, or I'm not able to turn my video on. Let's see if I can share my screen. Nope, it says it's not enabled.
We try to enable that.
Otherwise, if you want to share the slides from your end, I can probably see them on my end too.
Yeah, that's right. I do have the slides here.
Yeah, and my apologies, everyone. It's just been a crazy week, as you'll hear here in a moment, on this regulation and everything else. And like the prior speaker said, here we are on a late afternoon, sunny day, and we're going to be talking about a regulation and policy, and in this case, not even a North American regulation. So appreciate your attention, and my sincere apologies. I'm not able to be there. And thank you, Mike and Sarah, for your support in this.
Try one last time, see if you can share. If not, I do have your PowerPoint up and we can make that work.
Okay, it says I'm sharing.
Ah, it is. We can see it. We can see and hear. Take it away, Rebecca. And our state senator wasn't able to join us today at 4:30, so take as long as you want.
Well, there's another snafu there. Our SAPI computers have a forced shutdown at 4:30 Eastern, so I will disappear at 4:30 Eastern. But I can rejoin from my cell phone. It's just been crazy. So anyway, thank you for that, Mike. We'll make it through here. I can't see you all now that I'm sharing, so feel free to jump in, Mike, if you guys can't hear me or see the slides at some point. Okay, we're going to talk about European Union deforestation regulation. I need to say this disclaimer. This is very important. What I'm going to share with you, some of it is literally hot off the press in the last few days. This is information that SAPI is willing to share, but this is just our interpretation as we continue to try to understand this new regulation. This is not legal advice. This is in no way counsel from SAPI to any of you, and this is not official guidance for anyone else. This is just SAPI's understanding, and it's very important that this disclaimer be said, and I hope you all understand the nature in which it's important to have that stated up front. Okay, some of you may have heard that last week was a very busy week with regards to EUDR. I've heard everything from, is it delayed? It's canceled. We don't have to worry about it. It's been changed. Guys, that's not true. The European Commission on Agriculture does not have the authority to change, cancel, or delete the regulation. What they did last week was they proposed a delay of 12 months in the date of application. There are two dates that are important here with this regulation. The first date is the entry into force date. That remains unchanged. That is when this law went on the law books, and that is June 29th, 2023. That is important because product produced after June 29th, 2023 needs to comply with EUDR. That is not what they're proposing to change. What they're proposing to change is the application of the requirement to provide geolocation data and other data. And they're proposing that it be extended by 12 months. That's the only thing they're proposing. They're not proposing any changes to the regulation itself other than that. The EU Council needs to debate and vote on this. If the Council votes to approve it, it then goes to the EU Parliament. The EU Parliament could vote as early as November 13th or as late as December 18th, or frankly, if they miss this window and they don't get the process down right, they will miss the window to extend this and it will not be extended. So if you're hearing things about, hey, this is a huge win, this is not a win yet. And even if it does get proposed, unfortunately for the rest of the world, this is not a big win. This is a huge win for Europe. Europe is already drinking champagne, and Europe will have another 12 months if this gets approved before they have to do a single thing. The rest of the world is already behind because if our products are not placed on the European market before the date of application, then all the requirements apply. And for any of you involved in wood procurement and manufacturing, you're probably already procuring wood that will not be in products that are made now. They're going to be in products made next year and not shipped to Europe until 2026. And that means all of the stuff you're doing right now needs to comply. So from the get-go, this regulation was written by Europeans for primarily the benefit of Europeans, in my opinion. And it will work better for Europeans than for the rest of the world. And the rest of the world has never been invited to consult or advise on this regulation. But this is important. Right now, as we sit today, it takes effect. All of the requirements and data submission requirements take effect December 30th, 2024. Okay, what is it? You might say, well, I don't even know what she's talking about. Well, EUDR prohibits all sources from deforestation. Deforestation is not scientifically defined in this regulation. We're foresters, we probably know what we think that means. In the infinite wisdom of the EU, deforestation is only conversion of forest land to agriculture. That's all they're worried about. They're not worried about development, infrastructure projects, mining. They're only trying to stop conversion to agriculture. But interestingly, they are trying to stop human-caused conversion and natural disturbance events, which is actually laughable, of course, right? But they do include natural disturbance events and any subsequent conversion that results from them. There's also requirements to avoid forest degradation. And unlike things like Lacey Act that we're probably familiar with, there is no de minimis. De minimis is a legal term that means an insignificant amount. In the eyes of EUDR, there is no insignificant amount of noncompliance. Why now? Well, we continue to lose a lot of forest acreage around the world, not so much in North America, of course, and most of it, 90% of it is lost and then turned into agricultural land, and that is the Food and Agriculture Organization globally, data from them. Additionally, almost every country has some sort of law preventing forest loss, and it has not been effective. The scope of EUDR includes commodities like cattle, cocoa, coffee, oil, rubber, soy, and wood. It is not just our industry that they're targeting. It does not include finished textiles. So companies that make dissolving pulp like Sappi, and then it's turned into textiles, the textiles are not included. Pharmaceuticals are not included. Interestingly, bamboo is not included. I have a conspiracy theory on that if I was up there in person, I could share with you all during happy hour. And recovered and recycled products are also not included. So what is this requiring? Well, first off, you have to exercise due diligence. Most companies do that because we've been certified for 20, 30 years to FSC, SFI, PEFC, etc. However, all of those standards allow for legal and limited amounts of conversion. EUDR does not allow for any wood from deforestation. Again, remember, their definition of that is important. There's a variety of things you have to upload. We'll get into that more later. And apparently, this is pretty unique for European law. There is a minimum 4% fine for any non-compliance. So many people think that this is going to be a great revenue source for the European economy, which is in pretty dire straits. There are pages and pages of definitions. I'm not going to read these. I've only highlighted a couple. And I've already talked about deforestation. When you are talking about EUDR, it's very important that you understand the definitions in the regulation because they are not what you are going to think they are as a forester or as a wildlife biologist. And so this is one of the things we're trying to drive home with customers. When they start asking us questions, I need to know whose definition are they using? Are they using a scientific definition of deforestation, or are they using the EUDR scope of deforestation? And there's other definitions too that are important. This transition period I referred to, this is a little bit technical, but products that get into Europe before the end of the year. And I'm going to assume right now that this proposal to delay does not succeed, because right now it is not effective. Okay, so let's just go with the current dates, December 30th, 2024. If you can get your product into Europe before the end of the year, it does not need to comply with the data requirements of EUDR. But if it does not enter Europe until after the end of this year, then it needs to comply with EUDR, assuming that that product was produced after June 29th, 2023. So there is an 18-month window for European operations, but there is not an 18-month window for the rest of the world, because again, the sourcing that we're doing right now is for products that won't get to the European market till next year. And no one in the world seemed to know anything about this regulation until December 2022. And by that point, it was already too late. And by the time it went on the law books, no one was even familiar with the requirements. So we are already behind is the point. Okay, well, what's the big deal? These data requirements I've referred to. This is right out of Annex 2 of the regulation, the last page of the regulation. And most of this, for those of you that don't work for a manufacturing company, most of this is already provided through the custom export import declarations and things like that. But the new requirement that is the biggest problem, there are many, many problems, but the biggest problem is the requirement to provide geolocation of all plots of land where the commodity was produced. This means harvest areas for every harvest area that was used to produce fiber for your product. That is a big, big problem. No one in the world in our industry, and no one in the world in the agricultural industry that makes an aggregated product can do this. Now, some of you are going to say, well, that's not true. Blockchain and Walmart, I can trace an apple to a tree in Australia. Yes, you can. But an apple came from one tree. An apple did not come from 10,000 trees. Our pulp, our packaging, our paper products comes from hundreds of thousands of locations that are blended in digesters, and there is absolutely no way to know what X number of plots and which specific plots that product came from. And the soybean industry, the coffee industry, the cocoa industry, they are all facing the same exact problem because they dump their coffee beans into a silo, and they might have 1,000 coffee suppliers. They don't know which bean came from which coffee grower once it's put into the silo. So what does plots of land mean? Well, if you have less than 4 hectares, you can provide a GPS point. But if it's more than 4 hectares, and let's face it, most of our real estate properties and harvest areas are more than 4 hectares, then you need a polygon to describe the perimeter of the plot of land. Plot of land is defined as a single real estate property. So you cannot draw a polygon around the state of Michigan and say, I'm sourcing from the state of Michigan, because obviously there are millions of landowners in Michigan. This regulation is going to be much easier for the Southern Hemisphere, where it is mostly company-owned plantation land in a single real estate property. This is going to be virtually impossible for the North America, Canada, and the US, where we have millions of private landowners, and therefore millions of properties that we need to now plot through polygons and try to figure out how to track through our product manufacturing process. Any deforestation, degradation, and any illegality in any part of the real estate property, even if the illegality is not related to forestry, makes that non-compliant. And if you have a real estate property with very different conditions, say a forest and a farm field, those need to be split out and considered separately. So very complicated, very problematic in terms of those requirements. There are some additional recent developments that have just come out in the last few days, and why I'm operating on pretty low sleep. So first off, as I mentioned before already, the EU Commission has confirmed that they intended to have different requirements for the rest of the world. Frankly, I believe this would be a World Trade Organization case for trade barriers and things of that sort, but the World Trade Organization cannot file a trade barrier until it takes effect. So it's very frustrating because we've all spent 16 months and countless amounts of manpower and money to figure this out. And we won't know if a World Trade Organization appeal is going to be effective till after it takes effect. But in any case, since March, we've been promised from the EU Commission FAQs and a guidance document. They just released those last Thursday, so a week ago. And it's over 100 pages in totality of content to try to review and couple with previous FAQs that have been sent out before. Also, I'm not going to say much more about this, but just FYI, the various certification systems, primarily FSC, PEFC, and SFI, have all created optional EUDR modules that if you are certified, you can sign up for. I would caution everyone to just make sure you understand that in the regulation, they do not consider certified products to be compliant. So even if you pay additional fees and go through additional auditing costs to get the FSC stamp of approval for EUDR, the EU Commission does not recognize that as compliant. They do recognize that it may help you in your due diligence assessment, and they do recognize that certain systems that are credible may have value, but it is not a green lane and it is not considered to be compliant. Additionally, everyone in your supply chain would need to opt into that optional module. Well, as you guys probably know, certification's been around for 30 years, and we can't even get everyone in our supply chains to be certified under the regular standards, much less under an optional European regulation. So that's probably going to fall on pretty deaf ears in North America. Europe is drinking the Kool-Aid and Europe's all in. So, that's going to be interesting to see where those optional modules go. And there's been, now I can't even, there we go, can't even move that. There's been, varying levels of engagement on those certification systems around the world as well. Okay, in their infinite wisdom, the EU Commission has created an online data portal where you can go check out what they think they know or what they've gathered in terms of data on deforestation. Now, some people will probably say, well, have I verified this data? No, Rebecca Bernard has not verified this data for every country in the world. I don't have time to do that. What I care about is what does the EU Commission think they know? Because one of the requirements in the regulation is for the EU Commission and the EU member states, so Austria, Germany, France, etc., to determine the risk of every country in the world. They've hired one consultant who is supposed to be determining each country's risk using data from this data portal. Now, the irony and the ridiculousness of this regulation is that even if you are classified as a low-risk country, you still need to do all the due diligence and you still need to gather all the geolocation points. So it only helps you on the enforcement end because it reduces the enforcement checks if you are a low-risk country. But in any case, you can see a couple examples that I've gathered here. Canada and the US, extremely low risk for conversion to agriculture. Again, remember, that's the definition of deforestation or EUDR. You can see comparatively Brazil, basically 48% of the time that they lose forest land, it goes into agriculture. Argentina, 81% of the time that they lose an acre of forest, it goes into agriculture. And Paraguay, 93% of the time. So I'm just surmising that we will be low risk, hopefully. And I'm surmising that some of these other countries in South America where many companies get pulp from will be high risk. And how that will change global trade, I don't know. I've heard people say, well, this isn't going to change global trade. Wake up. It absolutely will change global trade. And that is the entire intent of this regulation. And if you read it, they spend about 15 pages in the beginning of it talking about how in Europe they want it to change global trade. So this will have impact because if you are now sourcing from a high-risk country, you now are going to have higher enforcement checks and obligations. And is that going to disincentivize you from sourcing from high-risk countries, even if what you're sourcing is compliant? Degradation, you may have heard about this term. They have their own definition of degradation. There is no globally scientifically approved definition. But the important thing to remember here is take yourself out of the forester realm, okay? Pretend you're not a forester, pretend you're a politician. And I hope there's some laughing going on. That's obviously a risky thing to try to pretend, but pretend you're a politician. I'll let you figure out if you're a well-intended or not well-intended politician. But in any case, you're coming up with your own definition for these things. You're not focused on 5 acres by 5 acres, okay? You're kind of trying to come up with some global definition that describes the worst of the worst. So degradation in their definition focuses on conversion of primary forests into something else, or conversion of a natural regenerating forest into a plantation forest. If you are not converting it, you are not degrading it. Even though we as foresters might say, well, okay, there were some BMP violations, or the soil was degraded, or there were biodiversity concerns. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about converting a primary forest, which means it has no anthropomorphic activities in it, or a naturally regenerating forest into something else. So if you're not converting it, you are fine. Furthermore, the definition of plantation excludes things that resemble a natural forest at maturity. All of our planted stands resemble, again, not if you're thinking from an exact wildlife biologist and forester standpoint, right? But they do resemble a natural forest in our country. We're not using invasive non-native species of eucalyptus and such. Anyway, degradation, we think that there's a solution here. There's an intergovernmental panel on climate change run by the UN, and they have a report that covers many countries. I'm only showing you Canada and the US here. And in this report, the UN themselves have identified managed and unmanaged lands. This is not a SAPI report. It is not a Forest Service report. It's a UN report. And if you look, they have identified the entire lower 48 as managed lands. And they've identified the entire southern half of Canada as managed lands. So I think we should use that and say, by your own UN report, you are telling us that these forests that we're sourcing from are managed, and therefore they do not meet the definition of primary forest, and move on. There are so many people that are trying to focus on this regulation and getting into months and months of discussions and arguments, and it's going to do no good. It is not going to benefit the forest management of a single acre in our country. So why devote precious time and resources when we should be devoting them to biodiversity challenges, like we just heard from the previous presenter? So SAPI is really trying to encourage people to get out of our own way. We're scientists. The regulators are not scientists. Use the words against them and for us, right? So that's sort of what we're trying to pretend or project. We just learned that again, in their infinite wisdom, you'll have to submit all this information to an online portal. And they have set a limit of 10,000 sourcing areas per product. Again, many of you may not think that sounds like a problem. 10,000 might sound like a lot to you. That is a problem. There are many, many, many times more than 10,000 harvest areas that are, aggregated into a product, and not just for our industry, coffee, cocoa, etc. So 10,000 is not sufficient by a long stretch. And then they've also set a 25 megabyte size limit. We can send emails almost up to 20 megabytes pretty uniformly, right? So they're saying, okay, 25 megabytes is the biggest file of all these GeoJSON harvest areas you can send us. Pretty easy to get above 25 megabytes. So even if you've been trying to come up with a precise and comprehensive solution, their own system is going to prevent you from being precise, accurate, and comprehensive. It is incredibly frustrating, everything about this whole regulation. SAPI's been working on this for 14 months, good, bad, or otherwise. I am leading our compliance charge. So in March, we sent out policy changes to our suppliers. We may have some suppliers sitting in the room there, or you may have seen these through the grapevine. In our policies that we sent out in March, we made it very clear that effective immediately, we cannot accept any pulpwood or chips from lands that have been or will be converted to agriculture. And this includes through our sawmill residual chip suppliers. SAPI is not in a position to not continue with our European business. Some companies don't have European business. And so you may not care about this regulation, but if you're supplying to companies like SAPI, you will have to care about this regulation. So it's a very interesting dynamic, but that is you know, the one requirement of this regulation. The EU Commission has confirmed that you can report more than the actual, so you can report in excess, essentially, but if you do that, you are responsible for all compliance on all parts of the real estate property for all plots of land that you submit. So there's a pro and a con to that. Fortunately, we're in a low-risk country for illegality, so that may or may not outweigh the risk there. Every company is going to have to decide how they're going to do this. But you can declare all of the goods that entered your wood yard or your silo since it was last emptied. Again, people are getting real hung up on that, and they're saying, well, we don't empty our wood yards. Okay, but you can probably identify how quickly the wood goes through your wood yard. And even though you're literally not emptying a vertical silo, you are emptying your wood yard through your processing times. Again, some of this is, we can really get in our own way if we want. So SAPI, being a global company, we have an excellent team of GIS staff all around the world. So we will be using change detection and GIS satellite imagery to identify the actual harvest areas. We also require supplemental data on our deliveries. I can't give you specific information in terms of how we are planning to comply because that's considered to be proprietary, but I can tell you that this overall approach hinges on supplemental data from our deliveries, real estate property data that we have purchased from Regrid, as well as change detection that we will be doing annually through satellite imagery. Now, we aren't able to, at the moment, figure out how that will be compatible with this IT system that they just released last week and the 10,000 polygons and 25 megabyte size limit. But at least for our own data, that's what we will be doing because we do not intend to force blockchain, which would have huge costs for everyone in the supply chain. We do not intend to do that. There are certainly discussions in other parts of the world and in the parts of the United States, particularly the Southeast, where companies are trying to go down the blockchain route. We do not feel that that is ever going to be practical, nor do we want to add that cost to our supply chain. And many of you, of course, know about GIS. This presentation I've given to non-foresters, but this is kind of a cool image our GIS team came up with. So, you know, obviously you guys get this. We can see what was forested, we can see what's not forested based on comparing satellite imagery. Now, lastly, to close out, there are lots of problems with this regulation. I do not have time. Even if I had another hour, I wouldn't have time to go through all the problems. I think the biggest unique problem is two things. First, there are people saying, well, this is good because it's going to finally require due diligence. That is a very dangerous perception for our industry. We have been doing due diligence for 30 years or more, and we've been leading this, you know, peer industries in due diligence through certification, recycled fiber, all of these things, BMPs, logger training, you know, accredited forestry degrees, all of these things. And so for the takeaway to be that the result is going to be positive because we're now doing due diligence, that is very untrue and very dangerous. The other problem, in my opinion, with this regulation is what we're calling the crystal ball problem. If you are a soybean grower, you can look backwards in time to identify if your farm was a forest. That's fact. You can look at real estate data, you can look at satellite imagery, you know, you can look backwards in time. For our industry, we're trying to predict the future because if it gets converted to agriculture, it happens after the harvest. How are we to know if the land's going to get sold and a new landowner decides to convert it to farming? And we can't prevent them from doing that. We have something called private property rights in our country, right? So this is a crystal ball problem that the EU Commission, I don't think, realized and has not answered. How far into the future are we going to be held accountable? And how far into the future do they expect us to be following up with compliance on all the areas that we sourced from? Because again, we know, you guys know it, we're not the cause of conversion. We're at the beginning of that trajectory. And if it gets converted, it's typically for other reasons after the harvest, and we don't have anything to do with it. So those are some problems. Again, this is not legal advice. I hope that was helpful. I can rejoin from my phone if there are any questions, because I'm going to get shut down here in about 2 minutes.
Thanks, Rebecca. We're going to see if there's some questions here in the room. We got a couple of microphones running around, so hopefully they can hear you. feel free to, log off your laptop if you need to.
Great, yep, I'm getting signed in right now. You'll probably see that request.
So, interesting, rather disturbing presentation. What happens when the people in Europe can't get any coffee or cocoa or other products that they depend on? I mean, this seems like they're shutting themselves off from trade with the rest of the world.
Rebecca, are you there or making a transition? Did you hear the question? Okay, Rebecca, just.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, great. Can you repeat the question, Jim?
So my
Oh, she did?
question was, what happens when Europe can no longer purchase coffee or cocoa or other products that they depend on, their economy depends on? It seems like they're isolating themselves from the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent question. I think it's a very practical question. I think it's one that they should have thought of before. But quite frankly, I think that's really the driver in this proposal to delay. I think they are realizing, kind of having an oh shit moment, a come to Jesus moment right now. I think they're realizing that the question you just asked is actually reality and is going to happen, and they are not set up to be self-sustaining in terms of either supply of products or even revenue and economic aspects of this. And I believe that if it wasn't for that, I don't think Europe would have even proposed to extend this. I don't think they care about the challenges the rest of the world are going through. So I think it is for that very reason that this proposal to delay occurred. I also believe that they, I think, are fairly arrogant as just a region. And I think that they believe that people will have no other choice but to go through the costs and the workload because they're going to need Europe. They're going to need European markets and they're not going to have a choice. And I think that's going to be tested pretty hard here in the months and years to come. This is not going to sort itself out even in another 12 months. This regulation is going to be a disaster for several years. And I think we won't know for sure the result of the global trade changes until they start to do their enforcement and their penalties and their monitoring checks. I would love to be in all these courtrooms when they start to do their first enforcement checks and try to fine these countries and these companies 4%. I'd love to see what's going to happen there. So I think they're going to have a rude awakening, and there are industries and there are companies saying, fine, we're not going to send any product to Europe. Now, whether that's a bluff or not, time will tell.
We got more questions coming for you, Rebecca.
So I came across this about a year ago and really haven't looked into it again since, but it was my understanding at the time that we're actually at a great advantage for this because like we have products over here like Onyx that has basically the whole country mapped out for property lines where Europe doesn't. And like we're in the process of doing that, but for the moment, aren't we still at an advantage?
No. I know exactly what you're talking about, and that formed the basis of SAPI's approach as well. First off, Onyx and Regrid do not have the entire country mapped. Places like Maine that are unorganized in the northern half of Maine are not mapped, and so we have places in the southeast. We have various tribal lands that are not mapped. So first off, we don't have everything mapped. We do have a good deal of it, but not everything. And there's a lot of errors in that data. Our GIS team has been spending months cleaning up that real estate data. But we are better positioned in real estate data than some. You're right on that, but we're not totally there. Second point is that in Europe, this regulation will work pretty well for European operations. And the reason I say that is because if you are a landowner, you are required to register. Now that's going to be somewhat comical too, to see if this happens. But if you don't register, the logger is going to have to register in this system. And the very first time that timber is sold, it will be registered in the system with one plot of land, right? Because you are the real estate property holder, or the logger is buying wood from you, and you authorize them to register that. So every time that there's a harvest, that will be registered with one plot of land, and it will be assigned a reference number. From there on out, no matter where that wood goes, it never needs to have a polygon mapped for it again. And it does not have to have a GeoJSON file uploaded, because all they will need to do is refer to the reference number. And so, for instance, SAP Europe, we have mills in Europe, they are not going through a GIS exercise. They don't need to. All they need to do is get a list of reference numbers through an Excel spreadsheet and upload the list of reference numbers. So because our forestry operations, our pulp procurement operations, all this stuff that happens in the rest of the world has no impact on the EU market. Therefore, we can't register it, nor should we want to register all of our private land transactions into the EU system. So the first time it's going to trigger a data upload is when you have a product like packaging or pulp or paper that is now entering Europe, and now you're going to have to do all this backward tracking. But again, in Europe, they won't have to do that. I hope that makes sense, but trust me, this is a major disaster for the rest of the world. The only thing that I think would make it worse for us in the United States is if we had high risk, because we are probably the worst positioned in terms of our private land ownership, you know, with, what is it, an average of 60% of the forest privately owned. I forget the average is, 30 acres, something like that. The rest of the world does not have that. Most of their forests are corporately owned or government owned. And so their real estate data is going to be much simpler, especially in the Southern Hemisphere where it's 10 or 15 year growing rotations. The ease of tracking that is just going to be totally different than for us. So the only thing we have going for us, frankly, is the fact that we're very low risk. But because the regulation does not exclude you from the requirements, even if you're low risk, then we're back at the drawing board.
Hi, I'm a grad student at Michigan State, and in my time there, I've been able to page through some of this regrid data that you talked about. And I guess working with the data, I know that there's over 6.2 million parcels over 1 acre, at least the state of Michigan. What sort of spatial, like, it's a really well thought out policy, obviously, what sort of spatial accuracy do they ask for? Have they even clarified that?
Yes. Well, I think part of the problem is that you had regulators who don't know what they're talking about. And I know I'm being a bit punchy, but it's been a frustrating 16 months on this regulation. You have regulators who, let's just give them grace and say they were well-intended, wrote this regulation with all these problems. Then they subcontracted the development of this IT system to another entity who is not really even using similar terminology to what's in the regulation. So in the IT, and I'm not a GIS expert, I'm just going off what our GIS experts have told me. In the information system, they limit you to 6 decimal points for your vertices of your polygon. And in the regulation, you'd have to go to 8 decimal points to meet the accuracy requirements. I don't know what that translates, but it's like feet. It's not, it's not hundreds, thousands of feet or a quarter mile, it's feet or maybe even inches. But then this IT system doesn't let you upload the data to the same accuracy. So we've been spending 14 months reading the letter of the law. And now last week we get this information system that's not compatible with the letter of the law.
Hey, Rebecca, how far down the rabbit hole does this go for something like pulp or cardboard or something? So you're purchasing some round wood to generate your pulp, but you're also producing sawmill residuals which come from a supplier who then do they have to track their inputs into that, report that up to you, so then you can report that to verify the full chain of custody for your product then?
Yes. Yep. Either they would have to do it or you as the procuring manufacturing mill would have to do it for them if they're willing to give you the data. Someone has to do it because, again, you cannot even have 1 ton of fiber that's not traceable to a specific plot of land. Now, the laughable part of this, again, is that how are they going to prove it? I would love to see how the EU Commission is going to try to prove that the polygons you submit are actually the right polygons. They're not going to be able to prove it. But see, we operate in a country where if you provide false data, you could be fired or put in jail. And this has happened. There are companies that are bankrupt and executives that are in jail because of Lacey Act violations and false data. Do you think countries like China and Russia are going to put their corporate execs in jail for providing false data? I bet not. And so this other problem about this is that, you know, we have a combination of our own domestic laws plus this law that require accuracy. And is this going to position us at a disadvantage in terms of the cost that we're now adding into our processes compared to other countries? And furthermore, compared to other non-renewable products. The fact that bamboo, which is grown on converted lands, does not need to comply with this regulation is a travesty, in my opinion. But yes, you'd have to go all the way down. Residual chips, if you're buying craft pulp on the external craft pulp market, your pulp suppliers would need to provide you with data, or you'd need to somehow get it. If they say, hey, you know, a residual chip supplier sawmill might not have the GIS capability. Well then, okay, but that doesn't excuse you from not plotting their locations. Yeah, excellent questions. It's this is going to be really interesting to watch. And if any of you see me and talk to me in the months and years to come, and I'm a bit crabby, this is why.
One more question. Have people seen consumers' prices already increasing in Europe in anticipation or like in the hoarding or anything going on? Maybe the hoarding is just an American thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if prices are increasing in Europe. I think that was the question. I have heard, I mean, even if you just listen to the news, right? I mean, this is coupled at a pretty dangerous time because we also have inflation. And I'm pretty sure the inflation is not just United States. I do think there's global inflation, but I'm not an economist. Certainly, we know there's inflation in the United States. So now this is going to add further price increases if the manufacturers pass those prices on down. I mean, that's a decision that, you know, companies are going to have to make. Are they going to try to absorb this cost, or are they going to pass it down to their customers? But I have heard anecdotally, I think, however you say that word, I always say that word wrong, that things like chocolate and coffee have already increased in price. Now, is that because of this regulation, or is that because of we just had a port strike? You know, there could be 1,000 different reasons. Fires around the world, who knows? But I do think it will change global trade, and this is just Rebecca's forecasting, and I do think it will have an impact on price.
Hey, Rebecca, questions are slowing down about EUDR, but since you are the president of the Society of American Foresters, do you have any quick updates on what's happening with National SAF?
Oh, goodness, yes, I probably should be prepared for those, but it's been a crazy week in terms of, you know, in terms of all this EUDR stuff. I can say that for those of you who were not at our convention, you missed a good one. We had about 1,600 attendees, which is one of the top ones, at least in recent years. And we had almost 500 students. So almost a third of the attendees were students, which I believe is a record. We don't have the final numbers. And so that was just tremendous. Really, really good turnout and engagement. I think some of the financial support that state societies are offering and national and others to get students there appears to be working. You know, there were all the tours were full. Unfortunately, they had to reschedule or move the Wildland Fire Tour because there was a fire where they were going to have the Wildland Fire Tour. But they did still get that one off. So tours were great. You just really, you know, from what I saw, good energy, good engagement. The people policy popcorn, if you haven't attended those are on kind of hot button topics. The old growth one was, you know, standing room only. So really, really good conversations there. In terms of the elections, I hope you all voted. The elections have closed. We won't publicize the results yet for a few weeks, but stay tuned for that. And certainly, you know, if you are interested in the future in serving in any of the board of directors positions or on a national committee, don't forget we have national committees that are always looking for people. You know, please let us know and we'll get you plugged in. Probably others I should think of at the moment, Mike, but that's it for right now, I think.
Cool. Rebecca, thank you very much. A round of applause for Rebecca, everyone.
And thank you, Mike, for your flexibility here. And again, I apologize, everyone, I couldn't be there in person.
No worries. We're glad this worked out. We've been having fun playing with Zoom all day. So thank you for making this work. And thanks again also to the folks on Zoom that have been patiently enduring our foresters fumbling with IT in front of a live audience. So thanks, everyone. We're going to do a couple of quick wrap-ups here with some logistics on tours tomorrow and a few other items or raffles. So folks on Zoom, you've got the bulk of the content. If you want to log off shortly, that's great. One quick thing to mention again, we apologize. Our last speaker of the day was Senator Ed McBroom, a Republican senator for the Upper Peninsula. And Rebecca, I appreciate your talk. I think it really underscores the importance of how we as scientists need to be informing policymakers on how do you make good policy. And that's something that we at SAF need to continue getting better at. And those of us on the program team, we're committed to continuing to invite politicians to come to this meeting, to talk to us, to listen to us. I greatly appreciated how Senator Sue Shink, the chair of the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee, actually spent the night drinking beer with us and went on a field tour on Friday morning. That was a huge commitment of time for a policymaker and her chief of staff. So we're going to continue inviting policymakers to SAF. They are busy people. It's not shocking that the senator couldn't come today. We're disappointed his staffers couldn't come, but we are very interested in SAF about engaging with science and policy, because policy does impact our lives. And Rebecca knows full well how, policy on another continent can impact how we manage forests and the business of forest products. So we're sad that Senator Ed McBroom isn't able to join us today, but we're going to keep on trying to engage with science and policymakers. That was one reason why I was so excited that Professor Vasut, I always get his name wrong, John Vucetich, the professor from Michigan Tech, the Wolf guy, that wrote really cool papers. And I forwarded his scientific paper to the director of the DNR. I forgot to tell John that the NRC is just meeting right down the hallway today. Talk about an opportunity to engage science and policy. We need to keep working at that, and we're going to keep trying to get better at engaging with science and policy. One quick item, on the topic of deforestation. Those of you that picked up a program, flip it over to the very last page. Look at the back page there. I want to make just one quick comment and maybe a plug for spring SAF. We're looking at April, I think 10 and 11 in Gaylord. And if you take a look, I've got the back of the program here. This is some FIA data, Forest Inventory and Analysis data from Scott Pugh with the Forest Service right over in Houghton. And this is a summary, high-level overview of Michigan. And we've been saying for a long time here in Michigan that deforestation is not really an issue. And, we do have net zero deforestation where we've lost 46,000 acres of forest to other land uses, probably mostly suburban sprawl, more urban development than it is agriculture, but I don't have those data. I don't know. But we've gained 48,000 acres from other land uses to forest. That likely is abandoned agriculture converting back to forest. But again, I don't have specific data on what land type was converting from what other land type. But I personally am very concerned that deforestation rates in Michigan are about to skyrocket, not because of high agricultural commodity prices, but because of that clean energy bill that passed last fall down in Lansing, where solar panels are popping up all over the landscape, and we're going to start to see massive amounts of deforestation on private and even public land. And we're going to talk about that in April down in Gaylord, and we're going to have some fun field tours, hopefully visiting some sites on private and possibly even public land that's going to be looking at land use change for solar development. That's exempt from the EUDR because it's not conversion to agriculture. So it's a complex, messy world. Let's get back to the fun part of the day. I need to show here that once again, I want to thank our sponsors. We have 16 sponsors that have been very generous in paying a lot more than you did to come here, and I appreciate them. Let's give another round of applause to our sponsors that are here on the side of the wall. And Sean Fisher at CJ Graphics in the back of the room over there by those giant tree farm signs that you're about to see posted all over the state of Michigan has 4 gifts that he is, raffling off here. So Logan Arnold, come on up and you get to pick between a water bottle and a coffee cup. Logan Arnold, where's Logan Arnold? Ellie Johnson. Ellie Johnson, you get to pick between a coffee cup and a water bottle. Pick one. You got a water bottle, a coffee cup? Sam Calloway at Michigan Tech. Sam, come on up. You get yourself a CJ Graphics water bottle. Sam and I were at SFI Lager training yesterday over in Barrick. We had a great time. Sam sat in the front row and asked hard questions. It was awesome. And now for the grand prize, we have Will Hermanit from MSU. Will, I think I just butchered the last name. Okay, we need to do a couple of quick logistics about tours for tomorrow morning. And we've got, what do we have? How many tours have we got going tomorrow? 5 or 6? So let's start with the easy ones. So the easy ones are, if you're interested in going to the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute Initiative, whatever MIFB stands for, they're having their mill residuals workshop here in this building tomorrow morning. I believe it's in one of the Peninsula rooms right around the corner. So if you're coming to that MIFB workshop, it's right here in this building, easy to get. Is that at 8:30, Ben? 9? Thank you, 9. 9 o'clock, here in this building, in the one of the Peninsula rooms. The streams tour, Sarah Top is here talking about stream restoration. Sarah and Mitch from Eagle are going to be taking a bunch of folks out to look at streams and talk about restoration and stream crossing permits. Sarah showed that you have to be here in the southeast corner of this parking lot at 8:30. We don't have buses lined up. It's going to be carpooling. Hopefully Sarah's got maps so that everyone can stay together. But leaving here at 8:30, southeast corner of the parking lot for the streams tour. Let's see. The LP Mill Tour in Newberry. Travis Kangas, you still here? Where's Travis hiding? Travis, what time you want the people at your mill?
Tour starts at 10 a.m. Anywhere between 9:30 and 10 would be perfect. Get everybody seated in the conference room. We'll provide all safety gear that will be needed. Postal shoes, we have radios for headsets. So we'll be able to listen to the tour guide and go through. So come into the property, check in at the guard check with the first building on your right. Am I not speaking loud enough, Mike? How now?
Give that man some hearing protection.
I love you too, Jim. So come to the guard check, first building on your right, you get there between 9:30 and 10, it would be great. We do have a safety orientation to do with the group. That'll take about 10 to 15 minutes. And then the tour will take anywhere from 45 to about an hour and a half to answer questions. If there's a lot of questions to do, it does take a little bit longer. This will be the last tour I believe we'll be doing that will have our old block flavor system in place. That'll be updated next year in May. We are I believe the last mill in the entire world to do this. So be something interesting to see and open to people can finally go with. But if there's any questions on travel, it takes about, I believe, an hour and a half from here to get there. If anybody needs the address, I got business cards or you want to stop 710 County Road 403, Newberry.
All right.
Early.
So you have to leave here at least by, say, 8 o'clock then to get to the LP Mill at 9:30. After the LP Mill tour, Sandra Lupin at Mass Timber of MSU is going to be hosting a tour of the new DNR Mass Timber building. Ben, can you get the handheld to Sandra? I think she's got some elaboration on that content. So those of you going to the LP tour in Newberry, there's a second part.
Yes, part 2. Hi, I'm Sandra Lupian with Mass Timber at MSU. We're going to be first
having lunch. Everyone who's registered is going to have lunch together at Zellers in Newberry. We can only accommodate those who have RSVP'd, so I'm sorry if you didn't kind of get on that tip. That lunch is hosted by Walbridge, the construction manager of DNR's building in Newberry. And then right after lunch, approximately 1 o'clock, we'll head over to the building in Newberry to then tour the building. So we're looking forward to that, and that is the first use of Michigan wood in a cross-laminated timber product in that building. Full stop.
Okay, next up, we have the biofuels tour. I pulled up where you will be parking. So the Ripley plant, for some reason, isn't on Google Maps, but you're gonna be parking in the services building parking lot. You wanna park on the south end, and that'll be closest to the Ripley plant, which is on the corner of Wright and Sugarloaf, right here. Does that make sense to everybody going? Okay, and Sarah Middlefelt is going to be joining, so if you had more questions or thoughts from her presentation today, there will be some interesting discussion. And the tour will be led by Giselle During, who's the acting director of the Ripley plant right now.
What time?
9 a.m.
Is there an urban forest tour?
Oh, and no, there is not an urban forest tour. We did not find someone to do that and forgot to strike it from the agenda, so ignore that. Okay.
All right, 2 more tour discussions. Let me show you. Okay, so I had this great idea 6 months ago that it'd be fun to go tour some Forest Service land. And come on, we're in Marquette. You got the Hiawatha on one side, the Ottawa on the other. How hard is it to go visit the Forest Service, right? Well, it turns out that there's not a lot of Forest Service land immediately next to Marquette. And my great idea was a pretty dumb idea. And so we had to make some quick changes this week. And some co-workers in the DNR Gwin management unit bailed us out because there were a whole lot of Michigan Tech students that probably didn't want to have to drive to Waco, which is a metropolis near Sault Ste. Marie. And Sault Ste. Marie is not on the way back to Michigan Tech or Gogebic Community College. Poor Bill. Can you imagine driving to Sault Ste. Marie for a 3-hour silviculture tour? Yeah, exactly. So I hope this is a little more convenient. So Sean has hosted a tour recently. He's got 3 very interesting forest types to discuss. It's still, you know, pushing an hour from Marquette. You can see it's 50 miles in an hour. Go west on 41, south on 95 to the intersection of 95 and Floodwood Road. Does anybody know that intersection? Is it easy to find?
Past the county line.
Just past the county line, so look for the county line sign, and Sean Fisher will be there in a big red DNR truck at 9 a.m. Those of you on the silviculture tour, we printed out the agenda here. So here's the 3 different stops that Sean's going to be discussing. Gotta talk into the microphone, take my own advice. But the bottom line is we've got maps up here. Please get a map. If you want to go on the silviculture tour, if this logistics works out for you, you know, to be in southwest of town, you need to leave the Ramada around 8 a.m. to get over to that intersection of 95 and Floodwood Road at 9 a.m. Sean will take you into the first site. Please carpool. Sean says that 2-wheel drive vehicles are fine, but you know, carpool if you can. For those of you that, you know, the 55 people that signed up for the silviculture tour, if this is a giant disappointment and a completely logistical nightmare for your travel plans tomorrow, you are welcome to switch to another tour. You can go to the biomaterials workshop here right on campus, the biofuels, you know, boiler tour or the streams tour. Those are all available. The LP mill tour is kind of maxed out at the 15.
We're back.
Yeah, and the Huron Mountain Club tour is full. So those are, you do have other options if this silviculture tour is suddenly less desirable now that you know what you signed up for. And I apologize for not giving you these logistics when you signed up for the tour. So I apologize for that. Finally, the 30 lucky people that get to go to the Huron Mountain Club tour, Well, first of all, that tour filled up back in July, right when we opened up registration. And so we're thrilled that there is an interest in seeing the Huron Mountain Club. And everyone going on the tour needs to be on your best behavior tomorrow. We need to be really good guests because we want the Huron Mountain Club to enjoy hosting us. And if we're good guests tomorrow, they may let us, repeat this tour next fall. Because we're looking at, the second week of October back here in Marquette next fall also. And so those of you that are also like me dying to get into the Huron Mountain Club, there will be an opportunity next fall as well. But for those of us that are going tomorrow, we have Justin Miller from Green Timber Consulting Foresters is the primary host. He's going to meet us up at the gate of the club to get us in. Jennifer Mullador is the ecologist that works at the Huron Mountain Club. She and Todd Penrose of Holly Forest Products, I believe both of you are staying at Ramada and able to help us. We're going to basically leave Ramada around 8:15 in the morning. Sandra has a fancy lunch for everyone going to the Mass Timber Building. I got you a 6-inch Subway sub to go to Huron Mountain Club. So there's trade-offs, for in life. You get the sexy tour, but a pretty mediocre lunch. But it'll be a fun tour. I think I just killed the mic here. That's awesome. So I think that's all. Any questions on logistics? Does all that make sense? If that made sense, please get a map for the silviculture tour if that's still of interest. We'll have the maps at happy hour. Ben, can you give us a wrap up? Don't leave yet. Sit down, everyone. We our president. This is Ben's last, final president meeting, and Ben has some closing remarks.
Hey, one more round of applause for the planning team, hey? So, per this strange tradition thing I've started, I'd like to maybe share a little bit about what I learned here today. I learned about the health of our forests. Aaron did well to show us the survey program DNR has built. Flying in planes, bugs with tough names, Marquette County now has oak wilt. Data collection capacity with a focus on accuracy is why community science is growing. Birds and vernal pools all have their own special tools, and the effort is always ongoing. Moscow to Marquette, the distance you'd get if you stretched it from head to tail, but the safer approach involves walking Superior's Coast on the North Country National Scenic Trail. Registered Forester Board, whether you're sling boards and cords, is a credential we all should consider. They have lots in the bank, with many of you to thank, to try and make the credential much bigger. Culverts undersized will be the demise of a well-intended stream restoration, stream channel alignment, the engineer's assignment, as well as proper stream simulation. Hardwood regeneration, always worth contemplation, and it's nice to see novel approaches like mounds we create because it's never too late to listen to our silvicultural coaches. By 2050, Sarah thinks Ripley could make NMU carbon neutral. I thought it was good. The greenest schools heat with wood, and the consequence of gas is quite brutal. Biodiversity crisis is really the nicest way of saying we've extirpated wildlife from 2/3. In 2001, legal challenges won because surplusage means no extra words. Definitions make a difference and could even be a hindrance when navigating the EU decision. Certification won't help, and I'm left saying, well, at their failure to provide some precision. Have fun tonight, guys. We'll see you.
All right, happy hour at the Ramada. See you over at the Ramada Inn. Thank you, sir. You're welcome. Thanks everyone on Zoom. We're all done for the day. Have a good night. We'll drink a beer for you.